seats, please. Just come up to 7 o'clock. We'll be with you now. Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right at the back there? That's the main thing. We'll turn up the sound as much as we can. Sorry?
Can't hear you.
You can't hear?
Shouldn't have asked.
We can't make it any louder, I'm afraid. We get feedback. So I'll talk as close to the microphone as I can. That's okay. Right. There we go. Sorry. Yeah. So, good evening and welcome. Before we officially start tonight's Development and Management Committee meeting, I would just like to say a few words regarding the conduct of these proceedings. The Development Management Committee planning is a quasi-judicial committee and it must be conducted in accordance with planning laws. I appreciate that many of you would like to have spoken to the committee in regard to tonight's applications. However, we have a limit of 3 speakers who wish to speak against these applications and a limit of 3 speakers who wish to speak in favour of the application. Together with the applicants, all of these speakers who have registered to speak with the Council Democratic Service prior to tonight and will be given 6 minutes to speak. I will tie into that 6 minutes, no going over, because we've been very generous. Normally we only allow 3 minutes, so we've doubled it, so you've got 6 minutes. You don't have to speak for 6 minutes if you don't want to. I therefore respectfully ask that you do not interrupt these proceedings, whereby I allow all the speakers to make their views uninterrupted and the committee members to fulfil their legal responsibility in deciding these applications in a proper and positive manner. Thank you. Right. I'll do the members. I'll just introduce the committee members if I go around just for the committee.
Okay. Councillor Sue Livings, Old Harlow.
Councillor John Steele from Mark Hall.
Councillor Nikki Hurst, Church Langley.
Councillor James Leppard, Harlow Common.
Jean Clark, Hare Street, Little Parliament.
Mike Danvers, next one on Mark Hall.
Bob Davies, Councillor for Mark Hall.
Thank you very much. Right, we now go to the agenda. Are there any apologies or absence for substitutions? Are there any declarations of interest, members? Councillor Stead, use your microphone, please.
Yeah, as I've already stated, the District Councillor for Mark Hall, in which the Eastern Crossing comes in.
Yeah. And that's likewise for me. The Eastern Crossing comes under my Harlow North patch as an Essex County Councillor. Okay? And you? Would you like to say so? Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, I'm a councillor for Mark Hall, so that's the area which the road is all, proposed road is going to go.
Thank you very much. Right, minutes of the last meeting on the 20th of January 2022 on pages 3 to 4. Can we agree those as true record members? Good. We can sign those. Are there any matters arising? No? Adam, are there any written questions to the committee? No? Right, so I'll just run through the procedures for the consideration of planning applications. At the discretion of the chair, the following procedures will apply when considering of planning items. Planning officer will present the reports. Comments invited from members of the public who have registered to speak, as I previously said. So we've got maximum of 3 for 6 minutes against, and a maximum of 3 for the application, again 6 minutes. And there's, I don't know if there's a councillor in the room, they'd be limited to 6 minutes as well, I think. Okay, Councillor. So comments invited from the applicant agent, who's, I saw him somewhere over there, thank you, okay. And he's got 6 minutes as well, all right? And then there's councillors, then after that, it's down to the members of the committee, the councillors' questions to the officers within the report, and then discussions of the item, and then we go to the vote. All right? So, we get this open, you know it does. So I go to agenda item 7 of the committee, which is Central Stort River Crossing, land adjacent to 5th Avenue, existing Eastwick Crossing, Hertfordshire, Harlow. I'll just go through it. The proposal is, I'll tell you, application number is HW CRB 1900220. Proposal is alterations to the existing 5th Avenue Road rail bridge and creation of new bridges to support the widening highway to the west of the existing structure to create the central, so obviously it's the Central Stort Crossing, including embankment works, pedestrian and cycle facilities, a pedestrian and cycle bridge over Eastwood Road, lighting and landscaping works, and other associated works. So I'll hand over to the officer, Jenny Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we start with the presentation, Chairman should note that there is an addendum that members have in their packs, and that states that there is an intent to judicially review the applications and the determinations. So therefore I'd like to refer you to our legal advisor for more information, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Hello there. I'm Suzanne Yotis. I'm the legal advisor this evening. I will briefly take you through a few points so that members of this committee are comfortable that there are no legal reasons why you cannot proceed to make decisions tonight, or to be clear about what is required of you. You will already be familiar that every single decision made by a public body or officer with responsibility is capable of having or being legally challenged. So this happens, it's a potentiality every single day, and that possibility is not any reason to be concerned that you are not free to make a decision tonight. But there are a few concerns that have been raised, and I will speak to each of them very briefly. I'm sure some of these issues will be addressed throughout the presentation. So a number of objectors or interested parties have raised a few reasons why they say these decisions are not ready to be made. One of those is they say that it's premature to make a decision. That's a legal concept, and normally it's not applicable in these situations. It arises when a local plan is still being made and a scheme comes along and maybe jumps the gun, it's too early. That is not the case here, because of course there is support for these crossings in policy, so you have no reason to be concerned there, it's irrelevant. There is a suggestion that perhaps if members take a decision about these crossings on their own planning merits, having regard to the local plan, or plans, two of them in two local planning authority areas, that there are related, associated outline housing applications that are often referred to as applications for villages 1 to 6 and villages 7. So the suggestion is that if you decide about the infrastructure, the crossings, does it impact that outline? Do you then predetermine? So the easiest answer to that for you tonight is that actually it's not in your gift to have any say about the outline applications, because those are in the area of East Hertfordshire. But regardless of that, predetermination is about members not having a closed mind to the merits, the relevant policies, any other relevant considerations, etc. And having reviewed all the materials supplied, I don't think there is any risk of predetermination, not at all in this case, because you're not the local planning authority for the outlines. But even if you were, actually members are capable of deciding each scheme on their own merits, and you are often used to doing this when you might make a decision on a planning application, but actually a listed building consent for the same works might be refused. So that's all I have to say about those points. Some of the more detailed matters that have been raised as potentially being problematic in making these decisions are about whether there will be environmental harms or harms to habitats by doing some minimal early works, etc. That should give you pause at this point. So there are two things that the law requires you to do, or requires a local planning authority to do, before proceeding to make decisions about different applications or schemes, development proposals that are related. These crossings and the housing growth they support, there is a relationship between them. And the law says the environmental impact assessments in that situation must treat the project as one development, but providing that work is done, planning policy says take decisions as early as possible when they're ready to be taken. So I'm assuring you that that work has been done. There are proper, detailed environmental impact assessments in place. The second thing the law says you must do, where two projects are related, looking at them together, and any other development in the area that when you add it all up has impact, it relates to what's called habitats regulation assessment. That is a very large detailed document which has now been published in full in Appendix A, I believe, to the reports. And that arose between November and now, where concerns were expressed. Officers listened to those concerns and published all of that in full rather than summarising it. And again, providing that that work has been done for two related schemes together, treating them as a single project to assess those effects, there is nothing to stop this committee making those decisions. And unless there are any questions, I think that's the sum of what needs to be said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. Right, again, can I ask a question? Is it relevant to what's just been
Is the
said?
judicial review?
Yeah.
Yes. Is the judicial review something that's happening or is just being threatened?
Thank you, Councillor. Normally, the judicial review can only happen once a decision has been taken, so there has to be a trigger for that. It has been suggested that that is the intention of some parties. What I am saying to you is that notwithstanding that, your role tonight is to be guided by officers towards what are the appropriate considerations, the appropriate policies of the Harlow district plan. You will get for context the East Hertfordshire district plan policies, anything else that's relevant to the decision. You will be guided about anything that's irrelevant. I'm not reticent about asking the chair for a moment to speak and guide you appropriately. It's my role to guide you to make sound decisions. So our role tonight here is to make sound decisions, and providing that's done, then they needn't be concerned about the judicial review. People will be entitled to do that always, as is their right if they so choose.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, Michael? Okay. Susan?
Thank you, Chair. So this evening I'm going to do a brief presentation setting out the application before members this evening, providing an overview of the relevant development plan policies, the geography of the application area, and a detail of the application itself. In January 2017, the government designated the strategic growth within and around Harlem as a garden town, which encompasses the allocated sites of the Gilston area in East Herts, east of Harlow, which is in both Harlow and Epping Forest districts, land to the south of Harlow at Latin Priory in Epping Forest, and land at Water Lane, also in Epping Forest, to the west of Harlow. Collectively development within Harlow itself, the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town comprises development of 23,000 homes, with 16,000 or so of them to be delivered within the current plan periods up to 2033. The three district councils of East Herts, Harlow and Epping Forest, plus the two county councils of Berkshire and Essex, have been working in partnership to bring about the delivery of this transformative growth based on Garden City principles. As the Gilston area and these two crossings is within the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town area, the documents produced for the Garden Town Partnership have been endorsed as being a material consideration in the determination of applications by Stort Council and Harlow Council. The transport strategy and vision both set the ambitious target of 60% of trips originating in new communities and 50% of trips within existing communities being undertaken by active and sustainable modes of transport. Two crossing proposals before you this evening are identified in the infrastructure delivery plan as being essential items of infrastructure necessary to deliver the planned growth in the Garden Town. We also have the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets guiding principles for consideration and development, and Section 9 of the Autumn Reports. This is the sections of the NPF relevant to the planning matters being considered. This application for Central Stort Crossing is one of 4 applications currently being considered, plus a listed building consent. In addition to the Central Stort Crossing in front of members, which is shown in the blue line, Places for People, the applicants, have submitted an application for the Eastern Stort Crossing application, shown in green, with this associated listed building consent. And Places for People have also submitted an outline application for 8,500 homes, plus community infrastructure known either as the Gilston Park Estate or Villages 1 to 6, which is shown in the red outline. Another application for 1,500 homes, known as Village 7, has been submitted by Brickens Estate, which is now owned and promoted by Taylor Wimpey, and this is shown in the black outline. Both outline applications will be presented to Stort members later this year. So in terms of the key considerations for you this evening about the applications, they are the principle of development, the design and layout of the development, impact on transport network and mitigation, climate change, flood risk and sustainable drainage, land contamination and pollution, impact on the natural environment, impact on the historic environment and greenhouse issues. This presentation, however, doesn't cover all of those issues in detail, as the information is provided in your office reports. So while members will of course be familiar with the Harlow local development plan policies, as the application is essentially a piece of transport infrastructure which crosses the boundary between Stort and Harlow, it is material to each authority what happens across the border, and as such it is useful to know about the key relevant policies in each of the development plan documents. It is for this reason that the reports contain references to and summaries of each set of policies where relevant. Members are advised that they are asked to determine the part of the application that is within its own administrative boundary only, while of course being cognizant of the scheme as a whole. So the East House District Plan adopted in 2018 allocates the Gilston area for the development of 10,000 homes and supporting community infrastructure. This is the single largest allocation in the plan and is allocated to be delivered within and beyond the current plan period. Policy EA1 sets out the requirements for the allocation, which includes, amongst other things, access arrangements and local highway measures to address the impacts on the wider strategic highway network, including the provision of additional crossings to the river Stort. Sustainable transport measures which encourage walking, cycling and use of public transport, through the provision of new and enhanced existing cycleways and footways that provide links throughout the site and into Harlow. Enhanced passenger transport services, including the creation of a sustainable transport route through the site, which will link into a sustainable transport corridor which links the Gilston area to the urban area of Harlem. And finally, the settings of objectives and the targets for the use of sustainable transport modes. Policy GA2 lists the transport infrastructure necessary to achieve those policy requirements. And this includes, in this application, the widening of the existing Fifth Avenue crossing and a new vehicular crossing of the Stort Valley. The policy requires the delivery of new northbound and southbound carriageways, a new footway cycleway, and for the crossing to become part of the north to south sustainable transport corridor. Lastly, policy DPS4 identifies the widening of the existing Stort crossing and provision of a second crossing and measures to facilitate sustainable transport and strategic infrastructure required to support the development identified in not only the East House District Plan, but also the wider housing market area. In East House, we also have a second development plan document in the form of the Huntston East Gilston Neighbourhood Plan. The Gilston Area Neighbourhood Plan does not allocate land for development nor establish the overall need for the crossings in the manner that the East House Plan does and the Harlow Local Plan does. There are, however, elements of the policies that are relevant to principal development in terms of securing and base delivery of necessary social and physical infrastructure to meet the comprehensive needs of the area. development plan sets the framework to guide and shape development in Harlow to 2033 and beyond. The plan requires that the spatial development strategy be underpinned by the timely provision of infrastructure necessary to support development in the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. With that development phased over the local plan units to ensure that the correct levels of infrastructure are provided. In order to deliver long-term sustainable growth in the district, further enhancements of the transport network will be required. Policy SIR1 and the Infrastructure Delivery Plan identifies other infrastructure items which require safeguarding or have a land use implication. And these include the north to south sustainable transport corridor and river Stort Crossing to eastward roundabout, the east-west sustainable transport corridor, and second river Stort Crossing at River Way. And policy SIR2 identifies the river Stort Crossing at the 5th Avenue enters and exits Harlow district boundary as being a key gateway for location. The Harlow Local Development Plan identifies on its policies map the location of the north to south STC, sustainable transport corridor, across the 5th Avenue crossing into the town centre and beyond within Harlow, as shown on the yellow dotted lines. The central Stort Crossing was infrastructure subject to 2 independent examinations in public and is supported in principle by policies within both East Coast and Harlow development plans. So this slide shows the geography of the central Stort Crossing proposal. In this location, the natural river Stort denotes the district boundary. The whole area between the A414 Eastwood Road and the railway line is within the Stort Valley and is therefore functional floodplain. Land to the west of the site, so the west of the 5th Avenue crossing, is within the Eastwick and Pondon Meads local wildlife site, which runs between the Stort and the navigation, and within the Pondon Moat Marsh local wildlife site and local nature reserve, which lies between the Stort navigation and the West Anglia main line. Land to the south of the existing A414 Eastwick Road is either the Greenbelt to the west of the crossing, and to the east of the crossing north of the river Stort is also the Greenbelt. South of the river, the land is designated in the Harlow local plan as the Green Wedge. It is considered that the proposal will cause some harm to the openness of the Greenbelt in this location, and therefore, in accordance with the National Plan and Policy Framework, the application has to demonstrate that there are very special circumstances that outweighs that harm. The application is to provide new essential transport infrastructure with the purpose of enabling and encouraging the provision of active and sustainable movement between new and existing communities in the Gilston area to key destinations within Harlow as part of a wider sustainable transport network. Furthermore, the application will enable the delivery of homes in the Gilston area totaling 10,000 homes, which, as I say, is the single largest allocation in the district plan and the wider Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. And these factors combined are considered to provide very special circumstances to outweigh the harms of Greenbelt. So moving on to some of the detail, this is the northern part of the central Stort Crossing proposal. So starting from the top, we have the sustainable only access into Village 1. This means that access is limited to buses and active travel only. Then we have the conversion of the existing A414 5th Avenue Eastwick Road roundabout that will be changed to a 4-arm signalised junction. To make provision for other vehicles to access Village 1, a new junction on the Eastwick Road is provided. So here the current Eastwick Road is realigned northwards away from Terminus Park, continuing eastwards as part of the Eastern Stort Crossing proposal. But importantly, the junction provides a dedicated access into Terminus Park, and the northern part of Brentwood Road does develop public house by the part of the retained existing Eastwick Road. The existing 5th Avenue crossing becomes 2 southbound lanes, with one lane becoming a bus lane for the length of the crossing. The main part of the proposal in physical infrastructure terms is the creation of a new northbound carriageway to the west of the existing 5th Avenue crossing. There will be 2 lanes, with one being the bus lane for most of its length, which then joins the running lane by a responsive signal controlled slip lane. This means that when a bus approaches the end of the bus lane, the cars using the northbound carriageway are held temporarily for the bus to join ahead of them for its onward journey either west, north or east of the junction. There's a 2-metre footpath provided on the western side of the new carriageway. And to the west of that carriageway, the proposal creates a new sustainable drainage feature comprising swales of vegetated ditches, a footpath and a new bridge over the river Stort, and this will therefore connect the towpath from the south northwards through the valley. The road crosses over the river Stort and then runs on a widened embankment. The special feature of the central Stort Crossing is the creation of a dedicated pedestrian and cycle route, providing a quality, segregated route from Village 1 all the way towards Harlow. It will take the form of a bridge over Eastwick Road, land and beyond the widened embankment in the middle of your screen, adjacent to the existing crossing. At grade, or at the same level of the road, there is also a segregated footpath and cycleway alongside the existing southbound carriageway, for those that do not want to use the bridge. It is noted that there is a small stretch of this route which reduces the road to become a shared path, which is 2.5 metres wide, and this is where it runs alongside the existing crossing over the Stort. And this is due to physical constraints of the existing bridge structure. The route then widens again to become a segregated route with an alternative route that runs down into the valley to connect to towpath. This is the southern end of the central Stort Crossing proposal. It comprises road bridge structures over the Stort navigation and the railway line. Dedicated pedestrian cycle route, as we just heard, runs continually along the embankment to the east of the crossing and then bridges the Stort navigation. Then it runs across the existing structure over the railway line towards Burton. As you can see again, there are bus lanes north and southbound, with a bus stop on the northbound carriageway and a bus layby on the southbound carriageway. Off the eastern side of the existing Fifth Avenue crossing, there are going to be public running improvements proposed at Burnmill Lane, Burnmill Close, and these will be secured by condition on this application. And the scheme, the south of the route will then tie into Burnmill Roundabout, which provides the onward connection to the North Centre Sustainable Transport Corridor. And there is a separate scheme led by Essex County Council to make enhancements to that roundabout and also to station approach. Because the new carriageway affects a local wildlife site and nature reserve, the proposal must mitigate that impact. The application proposes to compensate for the loss of habitat through new planting and landscaping along both embankments on either side of the carriageway, but also through the creation of species-rich wet grassland suitable for ground nesting and overwintering birds. The purple area shown on the plan indicates land within the applicant's ownership of 5.44 hectares of arable pasture that will be converted to a more ecologically rich and diverse habitat. This land also comprises 4.11 hectares of compensatory land required for the eastern Stort Crossing proposal, which I shall explain later. To compensate for loss of flood storage within the valley through the widened embankment feature, the proposal also comprises a conversion of arable grassland to an area of floodplain by lowering ground levels, converting this land to wetland habitat, using seeds collected from managed environments elsewhere within the valley. This is shown in grey on the right-hand side. In terms of biodiversity net gain, the applicant has applied the new Natural England Biodiversity Impact Calculator, known as shorthand Death for Free metric, and this assesses the benefits of the proposed ecological mitigation associated with each crossing. The metric presents outputs across three components: habitat units, hedgerow units, and river units. Essentially, the model is a tool for assigning a score to a type of habitat and its quality. Once you assess the baseline score, i.e. what the current situation is, the ecologist then looks at the proposed landscaping strategy or biodiversity strategy and works out the score of the proposed new environment, taking into account what is lost. The difference between the current and proposed is either the biodiversity net gain or the net loss. When using a biodiversity metric, replacing one highly scoring habitat with another adds little benefit in terms of the calculator. However, replacing a poorly scoring habitat with a highly scoring one is clearly going to achieve greater gain in biodiversity metric units. As much of the Stort Valley is already subject to either designations of the local or national waters, physical improvements are more difficult to achieve. Due to the short length of watercourse within the central Stort Crossing application site boundary, limited gain is possible for the river units on site. Therefore, as described in the report, enhancements are proposed within the applicant's land ownership of the site to the west of the Fifth Avenue crossing, where the applicant has riparian ownership of sections of the River Stort. With this area of on-site compensation, the central Stort Crossing application will deliver a biodiversity net gain of 12.27% for habitat units, 586.90% for hedgerows, and 2.03% for river units. Because the ecological compensation area is beyond the red line of the central Stort Crossing application area, but the land is within the ownership of the applicant, this can be secured and is enforceable through Condition 35. This meets the test set out in planning practice guidance. So while more than 10% net gain cannot be achieved for river unit element of the calculator, a net gain is still achieved in line with current policy. The main impact of the central Stort Crossing is through the loss of habitats for ground nesting birds, and this impact is sufficiently mitigated with the proposed habitat enhancements as described. And this complies with our development plan policies. But using a calculator is just one part of the equation. The most important part is actually securing and managing the newly created habitats in the longer term. Several conditions are proposed that will ensure this, including the submission of an ecological management plan for this environment. This will require full plans to be provided, such as spacing and planting, for example, as well as details of how the landscape will be managed in the longer term. And in terms of timing, as with the crossings being completed in phases, as for the compensation area, this is because there will be works being undertaken in the land to construct the new Northland carriageway, and therefore the landscaping works will in part have to follow at the site remediation stage of the programme. Comprehensive surveys have been undertaken prior to the submission of the application, which assess the type of habitats and species likely to be affected, and there is therefore sufficient information upon which to make a recent judgment about the potential impacts. However, in order to capture any changes that may occur over time, up-to-date surveys will be required by Condition 34 prior to the commencement of each phase of the development to confirm the presence of notable species and habitats and to agree appropriate mitigation as required. In terms of trees, 15 trees and 14 groups of trees have been identified for complete removal in the central Stort Crossing area, and 10 groups and 2 hedgerows for partial removal to facilitate the development of the crossing. None of these are category A, which are the highest scoring trees, 13 in category B and 28 are category C. 3 category U trees will also be removed. However, some of these groups contain many immature, low quality trees and scrub, and therefore an estimated 102 moderate quality and 286 low quality trees will be removed. A further 508 specimens are either standalone trees or within groups or hedgerows are to be retained. Where trees aren't able to be retained, they will be protected during construction using improved methods in line with British standards. To compensate for trees and scrubs that are unavoidably lost to accommodate the works, these will be replaced with suitable species with an overall increase in the number of trees. Opportunities will be taken to remove invasive species and replace them with more suitable plant species to introduce diversity which will support mammals like otters and waterfowl. A comprehensive but preliminary landscape strategy has been submitted, setting out proposals for informal groups for replacement trees adjacent to the highway, together with riparian woodland trees and scrub adjacent to the Stort and around the new carriageway, with large species at specific locations. Planting is designed to be incorporated with existing retained trees, and the landscape strategy indicates that approximately 870 trees, semi-mature and feathered, will be planted along with approximately 1,840 linear metres of hedgerow, of mixed native hedgerow planting. Further details of specific species and the planting regime will be required for the petition. The proposed mitigation is considered to be suitable and sufficient to ensure there is no overall harm to the nature conservation of the Stort Valley habitats. This is just an informal illustration of the proposal where you can see the extent of the bridge elements of the scheme over the railway line, over the navigation, and also the pedestrian cycle bridge over its ground. So the central Stort Crossing and the eastern Stort Crossing will be discussed later this evening are two complementary parts of one piece of comprehensive transport infrastructure, both operating together to provide a sustainable transport priority and both capacity required to serve the Gilson area allocation and to enable the delivery of developments in the Harlem town. This proposal is for the delivery of a critical piece of infrastructure comprising new bridges, new sustainable transport routes and new pedestrian cycle infrastructure. The provision of essential infrastructure carries significant positive weight and the development is considered to be acceptable in principle. The design and layout of the proposal has been designed to minimise visual impacts by locating the new carriageway immediately adjacent to the existing crossing. Clear parameters are provided to control the detailed design of dedicated foot and cycle bridges. The scheme proposes additional landscaping and planting around the structures, and opportunities are created to connect pedestrians and cycles into the valley landscape through new routes via the Stort navigation towpath. It is considered that temporary visual harms to the landscaping will arise through construction, and residual permanent visual harms arising from the scheme once operational will be outweighed by the beneficial impacts arising from the scheme in terms of providing that additional transport capacity required from the Gilson area outline applications, comprising 10,000 homes across bridges 1 to 6 and 37, and also in its support of wider planned strategic growth and sustainable transport objectives in the Harlow Council town. As such, it's again considered that the beneficial impacts arising from the scheme outweigh the visual harms identified. The preliminary structural designs have been agreed with the two highway authorities and are considered to meet relevant standards. Detailed engineering stages will follow that will confirm these details in collaboration with planning authorities. In terms of preventing flood risk and integrating sustainable drainage through the design, the proposal meets the requirements of the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authorities of Hertfordshire and Essex. The preliminary drainage strategy is agreed in principle at this stage, and subsequent engineering design stages will refine those details about the proposed attenuation features. And these again will be considered by control rather than by a series of conditions. The proposal is therefore considered to meet the requirements of the development plan policies in this regard. As Suzanne said earlier, the HRA, or Habitat Regulations Assessment, concludes that there will be no adverse effects on the integrity of any national network sites or conflict with their conservation objectives. There will, however, be localised harms that arise in the development due to the loss of habitats. However, it is considered that suitable habitat mitigation measures are proposed, which in terms of biodiversity again represent an overall benefits to the environment as well. In addition, there will be improvements to the overall design of the existing Harlow Crossing, and this will be through the replacement of old luminaries with new lighting technologies to the benefit of nocturnal species. The central Stort Crossing proposal is identified within development plans as being necessary in greenbelt. As such, the proposal represents essential transport infrastructure as defined in paragraphs 150 of the National Land Policy Framework. However, while the scheme has been designed to minimise its visual impact, there is some unavoidable impact on the openness, albeit that this harm is not considered to be significant. It is also considered that the proposal conflicts with the purpose of the greenbelt in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and as such, the proposal constitutes an appropriate development within the greenbelt in accordance with paragraphs 147, 148 and 150 of the National Land Policy Framework. The harms to the greenbelt and other harms identified above must be given substantial weight. However, your officers consider that the benefits of the Gilston area allocation and Villages 1 to 6 outline application, when coupled with your condition 4, are sufficient in and of themselves to outweigh the harm by reason of inappropriate development in the greenbelt and any other harm. Furthermore, decision makers can give significant weight to the benefits of the Villages 1 to 6 outline application. There is a great confidence that they will be deliverable alongside and or following the implementation of the crossings, given that they are associated applications with this proposal, and its benefits will be secured through Section 106 obligations, which is pending determination. The Central Stort Crossing, when operating as part of a comprehensive transport infrastructure proposed and delivered through both crossings together, will contribute to facilitating planned growth and housing allocations in the adopted development plans of East Herts and Harlow and the emerging development plan of Epping Forest. When considering the Central Stort Crossing proposal on its own merits, it is considered to comply with the development plan for the region as a whole, is in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework, and any other material considerations support the recommendation for approving the Central Stort Crossing, subject to the conditions and reasons set out in the officer's report, with 2 minor changes to conditions 11 and 40, as reported in the supplementary papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Very good. Right, speakers. Terrible, aren't I? Right, speakers. The first one I've got on my list is Rory Joyce. Would you like to come up? No, not now. No, not now. Sorry, Rory.
Don't come up now.
Yeah, yes, please. Sorry. I've been interrupted. You've still got 6 minutes.
These applications are being considered too soon, in advance of the later associated schemes for the development of 10,000 new homes in the 7 new Gilston villages. All these applications and new homes need to be looked at together. It's common sense and it's good planning. You have our reports showing that there are deficiencies with the landscape assessment and with the heritage assessment. Our transport consultants have highlighted that the transport assessment for the crossings contains significant gaps and inconsistencies. You are being asked to believe that the ambitious modal shift target, and I quote, is considered reasonable based on the high quality bus services and cycle routes that will be provided. However, no compelling evidence is provided to support this, especially for the new villages which are further from Harlow than Village 1. These schemes before you this evening have been described as being akin to a new bypass for Harlow, and we can see why that is. The proposed huge investment is effectively doubling road capacity into North Harlow and creates a strong incentive for new residents to use a car to reach destinations in Harlow and elsewhere. Without some sort of congestion charge, the massively increased road capacity almost guarantees that the modal shift share targets for the new villages will not be met. The HIG funding of 36.2 million for the central crossing is intended to cover the full cost of the scheme, comprising, as we've seen, 600 metres of new two-carriageway road, 3 new road bridges, including one over a railway line, a live railway line, 2 cycling and walking bridges and extensive earthworks. Hertfordshire County Council was made aware in December 2020 that the funding is insufficient. Therefore, the local authorities face a significant risk if these projects start before additional funding is in place. And there's no risk management plan to deal with this, or how it will impact the developers' Section 106 commitments, including to provide affordable homes. One of the 2 Gilston area developments is already indicating that they're going to come forward with a revised viability appraisal, which will inevitably seek to reduce their affordable housing provision. And there's no comprehensive master plan for the 10,000 new homes and their supporting infrastructure. That master plan should be done, it should be landscape and heritage led. We've seen some partial outline ideas which do not show how the sustainable transport target could be met and suggest it will be a traditional car-centred development at suburban densities. There have been legal representations referring to case law where developments that will cause harm to heritage assets are required to have a thorough consideration of potential alternatives, and that's correct. And our client, a local family, has commissioned master planners to prepare one such master plan, which I hope you'd see. And that does not need new crossings on the scale proposed here, nor in the same locations and not of the same nature, but it does provide the housing. It does not assume that the new housing development will generate large numbers of car movements, as we would expect from what may well become just a suburban addition to Harlow. And that's just one possible alternative. To look at the crossings now in isolation with their transport, landscape and heritage failings before taking account of the associated new 7 villages would be poor planning and very much putting the cart before the horse. We ask that these applications be deferred this evening until a comprehensive master plan is available so that we can properly assess how many crossings might be required, what their nature should be, how large they should be, and how to minimise the harm to heritage assets caused by the scale of the highway works. Anything else is clearly premature, poor planning, and risks predetermining the later housing applications. We are trying to avoid having to make a legal challenge, so we ask you to please defer these 2 applications and consider them again when you also know more about the housing schemes they will serve. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. Very brief there. Right, the next speaker I've got is Nicholas Taylor. Come forward. Thank you. You also have 6 minutes if you need all 6.
Right. I'd just like to, first of all, echo the comments that have just been made. Tonight, members are being asked to agree a scheme costing millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, which many feel will be wasted. It is ironic that our politicians condemn the actions of other governments when they take decisions which destroy natural habitats, and yet here tonight you are being asked to support a scheme which does exactly that. The plan to develop land at Gilston is a fundamentally flawed plan. There will not be any new roads running north from the development, meaning residents and visitors will only be able to enter and exit using roads from the A414. The proposed development is nearly 3 times the size of Church Langley in terms of the number of homes to be constructed. And we're all aware of the traffic congestion which can build up if any sort of road incident occurs on the 414. Without roads leading north, residents wishing to travel northwards, to say Stansted Airport if they work there, will have to use a series of minor roads through nearby settlements such as High Wyche and Salisbury. adding to the gridlock which already occurs on these roads. Evidence is now available which throws doubt on the government's target for the number of new homes required in each council area. As a result, many councils in the south east of England are throwing out or reviewing their local development plans, following increased opposition from residents concerned about the loss of green belt land. Councils have a duty to review these plans. It's a shame that the councillors at Harlow, East Herts and Epping Forest have until now not done so. I would urge members to pause making a decision on this planning application in order to give time for the three councils who are parties at Harlow and Gilson Garden Town to review their local development plans and the number of homes needed in their area. In conclusion, the proposal before you does little, if anything, to reduce congestion on Harlow's roads. Indeed, it will make them even worse than they need be. A decision to proceed should be postponed until a collective decision is made to review the local development plans of Harlow, Epping Forest and East Herts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Again, very good. The next speaker I've got Yasmin Gregory. Got 6 minutes as well.
I've got 6
Speak
minutes.
for 6 minutes tonight, do they?
It's honestly, I feel spoiled. 6 minutes. Wow, thank you. No, honestly, I really do. Grateful for this. I'll go that thumbs up when I'm ready. Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for permitting me to speak this evening. I hope you've all had time to read the Friends of Latin Island report, which was sent to you in November, and I think links were sent out to you recently, so that you do have that. The Friends of Latin Island are concerned that any building works will disturb and destroy the tranquility of the River Stort. This area is steeped in history and rich in wildlife, flora and fauna. The Roman temple site, which we all know, and artefacts may be lost forever. During the first lockdown, many people used the river and the park as well, the whole open areas that we are so blessed to have in Harlow. When people think of Harlow, they don't think of it as being a built-up area, they think of the greenery that we have. I moved from Devon 35 years ago, actually when there was a last storm when Michael Fish said not to worry about going out. And we've got 3 storms coming, so we're getting regular storms. And I could not believe how lovely and green it was. Harlow has been very good to me. I love the town. Both East Herts and Harlow councils have set targets to reach zero carbon emissions by 2030 and 2040 respectively. So 2030 is not very far away, it's only 8 years. So it's difficult to see how this is going to be achieved if these crossings, the crossing and the flyover, are built, as it is going to encourage people to use the cars for short journeys. We know to stop people using cars, you don't just reduce the number of car parking spaces. You've got to offer alternatives, you've got to offer better transport, you've got to encourage children to cycle, we've got to improve the cycle lanes. You know, Michael Hartware and Councillor Swords, they know how I've been banging on about cycle lanes for years. And it's looking after the bikes and everything else that goes with it. I was told last night that that's detail, we don't have to worry about that. But we do have to worry about detail. We do have to worry about building bridges where you're going to encourage rough sleepers. You think some chicken wire is going to stop them? They're going to find a way, they're going to get in there, they're going to sleep. They try and sleep. There'll be fatalities. There will be increasing crime. There'll be increasing drugs. And that is the fact. That's the true fact. That's what happens here. This is why we have trouble with underpasses and people being attacked. It doesn't stop me from loving Harlow though. Many of you would have grown up around the river and used the river. We've got the fishing, we've got local canoe clubs. It's our playground. It's a playground where if you remove trees, to make way for roads. So you're increasing roads even though you're talking about reducing cars and emissions. So you're taking away these trees that are established and you're planting them with saplings that we don't know how long they're going to take, because they're hardly lay land high. And unfortunately, as councillor Peirce knows, you plant saplings and they get vandalised. And that's something that we have to encourage our children to appreciate nature. Something else I'm not proud of in Harlow. We've got children, we've got young babies living in offices. It's so wrong. Their playground shouldn't be a tarmac car park where it's littered with dog ends, fast food wrappers and drug paraphernalia. But it is, we know it is. So especially for these children, we savour the green natural spaces that we have in Harlow. You have been given the opportunity to try and do something right here. You're being tasked tonight with the responsibility of making an important decision. And a decision that you're going to have to stand by and say, yeah, I did that, I contributed to that. And the question you've got to ask yourself when you go to sleep at night, could I have done anything better? Could I have stood up against this? And when you next see somebody walking down the road with their children with nowhere to go because you've taken away their nature, the playground that nature provided, then you have to think on that. So please, I ask, I implore you, I beg you to please think that you cannot rip up the trees, you cannot rip up the environment, you cannot remove these habitats where these animals will be displaced. You have dogs travelling thousands of miles to go back to where they were. Do you think just by putting some wire down that this is going to stop these animals? They will have nowhere to go. It's going to be devastation that we've just not seen. And for what? And for what? You're building a village in a village? Why build a village in a village? It's all fine. I accept we have progress and we have visions. Everybody has visions and visions can change. And the vision that I had when I moved here 35 years ago was to bring my children up where everything was free. You had this, we've got beautiful sculptures, we've got a sculpture right, you've got all this here. My grandchildren, they won't be so lucky. My grandchildren, they'll be lucky if they don't have asthma because of the pollution. Homes are being built which are divided, and all the flooding which we have a problem with, all the sewage that we have a problem with, that is all going to come down, and you in Harlow are going to have to suffer it.
Thank you, Yasmin. Your time is up.
The last person was less than 6 minutes. Let her finish. She's happy. Thank you.
That's fine.
You finish.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Quiet.
Thank you.
The next speaker I've got is Neil Baker. Speaking in favour of the application.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Chair for allowing me to speak in favour of the Central Crossing at this late stage. It's with a heavy heart that I speak in favour of the Central Crossing. But I attended the East Herts Planning Committee yesterday, and despite the compelling evidence from the parish councillors of Huntston, Gilston, Eastwick, the Neighbourhood Planning Group, Sawbridgeworth councillors and Hertford councillors, I do see that in isolation that this scheme would have some merit. If Jenny Peirce is correct, and if the transport officers that are sitting here are to be believed, when questioned, the project does seem to have some sustainable transport policy. It does include a bus lane. It does prioritise pedestrians and cyclists, and it's apparently designed not to increase traffic flow and intended to become congested and gridlocked. to entice future residents of the Gilston area to abandon the orchard. Now, this scheme is far from perfect, and I can't personally see any Harlow people using it, but it is far, far the lesser of two evils. The eastern crossing doesn't have a bus lane. The cycle track and the pedestrian lanes, that's just greenwash, an excuse to rubber stamp this very serious decision to destroy our green belt and our entrance to Town Park. Should you decide to reject the eastern crossing and give places for people the time to redesign the corridor for pedestrian, cycling, disabled access, then Friends of Baton Island, we own about a quarter of a mile of towpath. Now, we will give that up. We'll give that to places for people. We'll give it to Harlow Town to make a genuine cycle route. We'll sacrifice that for the good of Harlow. You see, I've spoken to site surveyors. The gentleman over here understands site surveyor. They come down, they're the people that do the operation work. They get in, they go, right, okay, the dumper truck's got to come in here, somebody else has got to do this. And this site surveyor, he's from Harlow, lucky he doesn't work on this estate, so he could talk to me about it. When he looked at these plans, he told me, whoa, Neil, this isn't little. This makes the junction at the motorway just like a walk in the park. What you are about to decide on today is massive. You're taking out a whole woodland. You're flattening the whole area. I was a little bit concerned when Jenny was speaking a little while ago, because when she mentioned the trees that went, they don't include saplings. They only include established trees. But when she mentioned the thousands of trees that will be replaced, they aren't trees. They're the same saplings. How many of them have survived? How many years is it going to take? But as I say, it's a lesser of two evils. Because the planning decision you make tonight is so important. More people die by car usage each year than for any other reason. I've got the wrong page, so I've got to look at this very careful. So transport policy is vitally important. Not only can you save lives, you can help people live a healthier lifestyle and help our environment if you do choose a truly sustainable transport system. Just as those campaigners who battle to have lead-free petrol have saved millions of people's lives worldwide, just as those that campaign to take out CFCs have saved the ozone and possibly the planet. Now you two tonight, you have that opportunity to make a truly sustainable transport system and to make cycling and walking leisurely. But to do this, you've got to do a serious transport system involving buses, a good transport system, and that's what I'm asking you to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Sorry. And now we've got the applicant, Mr. Beedig. I hope I pronounced your name right. Apologise if I didn't. You've got 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the committee, officers and members of the public. I'm Untitled Development Director within the Placemaking Regeneration team at Places for People, and I have the overall responsibility on behalf of my company for delivering villages 1 to 6 of the Gilston area, alongside critical supporting infrastructure, including the Stort Crossings that we're just discussing tonight. Following a very detailed presentation made by the Officer Jenny Pearce, which I thank her, I do not propose to repeat too much of what has been covered and what you have read in the committee report and associated papers. I would, however, like to re-emphasise 3 main points which I Ashton and Harlow Council, as well as the Highways authorities, that connectivity over the River Stort needs to be improved. HGT's ambition is that 60% of all trips originating in new communities are made by sustainable modes of transport and 50% in established areas across the Golden Town. The enhancements to the existing Fifth Avenue crossing and the creation of a new Stort Valley crossing play a critical role in facilitating this vision and providing for a more sustainable future. When combined, crossings will enable the delivery of HGT's transport vision of an integrated network of sustainable transport corridors, with the central Stort Crossing part of this network. They provide safer, dedicated routes for pedestrians and cyclists between Harlow Town Centre, Harlow Town Station, leisure facilities and the Gilston area. They create new public transport routes to and from Harlow Station, the town centre and Harlow employment areas, as well as creating a new link through to the new junction 7A of the M11 and once relocated, the new Harlow Hospital, which avoids the town centre. It will also assist with improving air quality in and around Harlow Town Centre, as the new and improved bus, pedestrian and cycle links will lead to less reliance on the private vehicle by both new and existing communities. The crossing proposals form an important part of the sustainable transport strategy for the Garden Town and are specifically required to support identified development in the adopted East Hertfordshire and Harlow local plans. Secondly, the housing infrastructure grant. With such a key role in the Garden Town, the new crossings will be forward funded by a grant from Homes England by Hertfordshire County Council. The housing infrastructure grant, or HIG as it's known, will help us to move forward to deliver the crossings and other substantial new infrastructure in Village 1 to serve both the new and existing communities. Of the 171 million of funding, 129 million is available to place for people, and the Village 7 developer will repay the HIG, which will facilitate the creation of a rolling infrastructure fund for use on local transport projects, such as the sustainable transport corridors throughout Harlem. Moving on to environmental matters. More recently, a welcome spotlight has been on climate change, and as a company we are committed to playing our part by promoting sustainable transport, improving biodiversity and reducing the impacts on the environment that construction activities will have. Detailed surveys have informed designs at every stage, with further surveys to be undertaken in due course. We will be retaining or recreating existing wildlife habitats, planting around 870 trees, as well as 1,800 metres of native hedgerow. As a result of our plans with the crossings themselves, there will be a biodiversity net gain. Whilst not directly linked to the determination application in front of you, more widely we are planting 6,000 trees across the Gilston Park estate this month alone as part of a wider programme of early planting. As part of the design of the crossings, we have taken account of and planned for more intense weather events associated with climate change through provision of sustainable drainage and flood compensation areas. The overall impact proposal has been thoroughly assessed with a submitted environmental statement of appropriate mitigation measures designed and secured by planning commission. In line with Town principles, the central Stort Crossing proposals have been designed to promote the use of sustainable transport to facilitate change in the way we travel. The proposals provide extra travel lanes dedicated to public transport, not private cars. The public transport lanes are complemented by pedestrian and cycle routes, as well as an additional footway cycle bridge over Eastwick Road. The latter will provide the most direct pedestrian and cycle link between Village 1 and the sustainable transport corridors in Harlem, alongside at-grade crossings, and will serve all 7 of the Gilston area villages. The central Stort Crossing proposal has been subject to extensive engagement both pre and post application submission. A series of amendments have been made to respond to comments received on the original application, which include improvements to walking, cycling and public transport provision. The Village 1 main entrance was changed to an active and sustainable mode access only as a clear prioritisation of the sustainable mode shared target. And normal mode Village 1 access was provided to the east. Improvements to landscaping to deliver green movement corridors and greater detail on sustainable drainage proposals. In summary, the proposed central Stort Crossing alongside the eastern Stort Crossing is a critical piece of HGTC's transport vision and forms part of a network of sustainable transport corridors across, in and around Harlow with benefit for the whole Garden Town, including existing residents, communities and businesses. This has been forward funded by Homes England to allow them to be delivered early and have been designed specifically to facilitate use of sustainable transport directly into Harlow Town Centre. Having worked closely with your officers, our firm belief is that the application meets policy requirements in detail and aspiration, and we hope you can support the application tonight and take the step towards the next current vision to become an exciting reality in the Garden Town, and where others will look to this project as a great example of what can be achieved. Thank you.
Spot on. Thank you very much. Yes. Now, questions and clarifications from the officers. Councillor Terminus.
Thank you. If I could just going back, because I had questions with Jenny, although presentations are also some other things as well. If I can remember, approximately how long will this work go on for?
You got a series of questions, or just?
I don't mind asking them all, yeah, that's fine with me. Secondly, we're being told the dreadful loss of the mature trees and so on. You said semi-mature trees, rather than just kind of whips, would replace things. How much in total is going to actually be spent on planting to replace the loss of the mature trees and the hedgerows that you named? Thirdly, the map with Burnmill Lane, the bridge has been closed. Essex have not opened the bridge for a long time. Will Burnmill Lane be part of this project? Will Burnmill Lane be reopened? That was from Jenny's presentation. Other things have actually been thrown up, Chair. Have there been traffic studies to actually say the traffic congestion on Fifth Avenue, which is appalling at the moment? I actually use it in the rush hour, unfortunately, for leisure activities to travel. Most mornings, Fifth Avenue is a nightmare at the moment. What's going to, with just the bus route, are you relying on the fact of the second crossing to make the congestion less, or is there some other kind of magic bullet that's going to make the congestion less on Fifth Avenue with these changes, particularly during the rush hour? I think that was it, Chair.
Okay, I think Jenny, you can take first two, yours, and then is it Adam? Is it Adam? Sorry, Adam. Not Adam. Sorry, Roger. Roger, deal with the highways issues.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of how long the programme is to go on for, it's estimated at the moment around 2 to 2.5 years from start to finish. There may well be some neighbouring works and also the design stage to start with, and that could take up to 6 months or so. And obviously we have discharge conditions and things like that. So from when they start constructing, it should be around 2 to 2.5 years at the best guesstimate at the moment. In terms of mature trees, in terms of how much it's going to be spent on planting, I have no idea. I don't know how much is being set aside for it, nor is that an issue for members. The number of trees and the landscape strategy and the conditions that are to be approved with the application are the things that are of merit to this council. So if it costs several £100,000 versus £1,000, that's not our issue. It's for the developers to put the mitigation in that we've said is necessary. In terms of the bridge at Burnmill Lane and Burnmill Close, that part of this application is outside of the remit of this application, but there are proposed public realm improvements from Fifth Avenue down to where the station line is and the access to the car park down there, so that is going to be a condition of this application. There is a wider ambition to make further public realm improvements to the west of Burnmill Lane, all the way up to where the Dusty Miller pub is, but that's outside this application to be dealt with at the outline, because the demand for using that route will be as generated by the new homes to the north of the town. And turning on to traffic studies, I think I'll pass over to Roger.
Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself, I'm Roger Flowday from Harlow Council and the Highways team there. Been involved with these applications for a number of years. And to answer the points, I'll start with Burnmill Lane, just to add to what Jenny said. She's correct in what she said. So just to answer your question, we're not going to be reopening the bridge. The priority there will be creating a better environment for people that live there at the moment, and to encourage active travel as well, so walking and cycling along that route to provide a new connection down to through, well, improve the existing connections, the connections that will be there. In terms of traffic studies, that you kind of mentioned what's been done, but really the traffic studies that relate to the impact of the actual housing, the applications don't generate trips, it's the houses that are built that generate the trips. But in terms of the infrastructure, you've heard today how we consider them to be a package, so it's difficult to consider them separately, but we have to. And so it's about creating a global capacity and balance that enables all of the trips, not just within Gilston, but also across the garden town, to be made in the way that we want for Harlow. So the vision is to create a sustainable place that can maximise people's sustainable journeys. So you've heard the number 60%, but equally 50% of the existing population. We're trying to create infrastructure that allows that to happen. And so the Central Stort Crossing, which is currently in front of you, the focus of that application, as you've heard from some of the representations, is primarily to provide improved active and sustainable travel connectivity. It's not seeking to provide additional vehicle capacity at all. That is effectively catered for with the Eastern Stort Crossing.
Thank you. More questions for both councillors? Thanks, mate.
Can you just confirm a few points for me? So there's approximately 500 trees going to be removed, and approximately 870 trees are going to be planted. 1,840 linear metres of hedgerows will be replanted. What have we got in place to ensure that all of these survive?
So we have a series of conditions essentially which require not only the implementation of the landscape strategy and the mitigation that we've deemed is necessary and appropriate, but also there's a number of conditions which say within 5 years, if any part of that landscape strategy fails, you're going to have to go back and replenish those trees. And that strategy is a long-term strategy. So that's every 5 years they have to come back and check again. So it doesn't just stop once they, put trees in the ground and go. With this particular arrangement of the applications all being a big thing, the outline application is 20 years in the making. We've got the opportunity to basically hold a developer to account that we haven't had before, because they are going to be around for a long, long time. So the conditions are fixed and they go with the land. So even if land ownerships change, those requirements will still be in place, and that will apply to whoever then takes that land on in the future.
Thank you. James.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions. It's regarding the archaeological interest in both the Central Stort area and crossing and the East Stort Crossing. It was mentioned earlier, I think by one of the speakers, that there was some risk to the Roman temple. Yet reading in the report, I understand that the Roman temple is not touched at all by this development. So if you could confirm that first of all. And secondly, on the archaeological points, it says that conditions will be imposed to ensure that adequate investigation of these sites can take place before any developments. I mean, what measures are planned to ensure that can take place? Thank you.
So in terms of the Roman temple, yes, I can confirm that there is no physical or visible connectivity or distance is such that there's no impact, and that's being considered in detail in the report.
Yes.
In terms of the approach to archaeology, this three-stage approach is something which our archaeology colleagues at County Council will not budge on. It's a long-standing approach that they take and has been very successful over many, many decades. And so essentially what they have to do is a pre-commencement condition. So before they do anything, they have to go in and do geophysical surveys. You've seen Time Team, they trace along with the electromagnetic scanner. They have to do trenches if necessary. They have to do window samples and things. They have to then report all of that and record all of that and get all that signed off by the archaeologists at both Hertfordshire and Essex, because they've been collaborating together to make sure they both handle the conditions in that regard.
Oh, sorry, James.
Another one. Thank you. In the report on the Central Stort Crossing, I'm doing by reference to the points on the papers. It's point 1030. The report of the Environmental Agency said it raised no objections to the revised conditions regarding flood risk and water quality. However, there have been a number of points raised by people contesting this application regarding the issue of sewerage, the adequacy of it, and that Harlow could suffer from leakages and also from floods. Nevertheless, I read in the report that Thames Water advises that there are adequate installations and capacities for that. my question is who is right on this? Is the current sewage adequate? In terms says it has no objection, so what is the issue here, really?
I think the issue is one of existing infrastructure. There have been issues which we know of within the Harlow area, and that's as a result of a number of reasons. It's storm surge, it could be blockages in the pipes. But of course, the crossings themselves don't create sewage or connect to the sewage network. In terms of the way the surface water is managed through the crossings in highway infrastructure, they have to go through several treatment trains to take the surface water from the road before it touches any natural watercourse. And you have to achieve at least 3 treatment trains to do that. So there'll be a staged approach to ditches, swales, treatment channels, that sort of thing, before there's any discharge into the natural environment. So in that regard, yes, the Environment Agency and Thames Water and other bodies are not concerned with the crossings because they have no implications on the sewage network.
Thank you.
James? Okay.
Thanks,
Just for clarity, can I just confirm that the highway drainage system does not connect into the sewage system, so it will not add any impact to the sewage system? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No one,
Is there's someone?
you got the floor.
Okay. This is on point 13.14 in the papers. Regarding the Harlow local development plan adopted in December 2020. I mean, this specifies quite clearly the requirement for the north-south strategic transport corridor, the east-west one, and both the central Stort and the east Stort crossings at River Way, and it's shown on the map on figure 10. What is the status of this plan, for our considerations?
Thank you, Councillor. So the plan was adopted in 2020. It went through adequate scrutiny in the form of public inquiry. It was consulted on, and the options reflected in the 3 policies in that paragraph that you've made reference to reflect clearly that the crossings proposed here are agreed in principle in that plan. So what is required of members is the detail that we're assessing today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa. James, have you finished the time?
Yeah.
James,
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I'd like to say thank you for East Herts for the presentation we had last evening. It was very well put over, and I think that we all put a lot of thought into it. Having said that, the reason I said that, apart from the fact that this evening is a wonderful presentation as well, but last evening there was a couple of points that were made, one by Councillor Peter Ruffles, and one, I'm not sure of the gentleman's name, that one of the councillors, but 2 of the questions that came up, I'd like to reiterate. Councillor Peter Ruffles spoke about the crossing and the bridge, the central crossing and the bridge, and spoke about making sure it had heritage within it. Now, Roger spoke with this for Councillor Peter Ruffles, and I would like to reiterate what Councillor Peter Ruffles said about putting the heritage. It's very important. We've got wonderful sculptures in Harlow here, and to have something so big, and as Roger explained, so open and expansive, to have heritage involved in that. So I'd like to reiterate that to Roger. And the second thing I'd like to reiterate is another councillor spoke about cycling across the bridge, and he would like to see a low-lying hedge in between the actual roadway and the cycle path. He felt that as a cyclist he'd feel very much more comfortable with that sort of situation going on. I'm not a cyclist, but thinking about what he said, I'd like to agree with that and make sure that that actually happens. Can I put that to you, Roger.
Thank you, Councillor, I'll take that. So, yeah, the bridges are subject to a design competition as per condition 11. And the level of detail that you refer to will be captured in the design competition.
Yes, come through here, yeah. That's excellent. Thank you very much, really.
Okay, any more questions? James?
Just, one of the issues I'd like to know a little bit more about, and it may not be directly relevant to this, but I do think it will come about at some time, is the parking facilities at Harlow Station and for access from the northern side. Is anything planned on that at this stage or?
Just so you repeat, so I make sure I understand correctly. So you're asking whether or not we're looking to create a new access to the parking from the northern side of
Harlem, yes.
Yeah.
Or
So-
people for bikes as well.
Yeah.
That's right.
The practicalities of doing that, I'll start where I began. So in terms of the focus is to provide and facilitate active and sustainable travel. So these facilities, these structures are trying to enable people to get primarily to the station in an active and sustainable way. So we're not looking to create additional vehicle opportunities to drive to the station, for which fundamentally you should be able to walk or cycle to.
You still need cycle, let's say, storage place there. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you're quite right, but as you've heard sort of several times today, and I know it's a difficult concept, but the structures themselves, these bits of infrastructure, don't generate the trips. The trips are generated by the outline applications, the houses. So the place to secure those contributions towards additional cycle, parking, etc., those sorts of things are within those applications. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Vicky?
I think this would most probably be answered by Jenny. There was a species study. Could you just confirm, because it actually says in there, there was different species found. It wasn't necessarily they were all found, but the habitat could, in future years, they could habitate that area. Can you just confirm what the species was listed in there?
So that's primarily around water mammals, so it'd be otters and water voles. So they're the ones that are normally affected by anything that happens in a riverine environment. So the applicants have undertaken extensive surveys over many years. They've been down to site, and their ecologists have said, well, of course, the landscape could actually accommodate these sorts of species because of the nature of it. However, their surveys haven't shown the evidence of them being there when they've done those surveys. So that doesn't mean that they can't be there, they won't be there, they won't ever be there. We know that there's otter programs for release, in the river Stort. That's been something which has been going on over the last 10 years or so, and they've been successful to a varying degree in different parts of the Stort. So we do know that there's always an opportunity for mammals to move up and down a riverine environment. So the safeguards that we have in place is to say that we assume the worst case scenario. We assume that this species could inhabit that location, and therefore when you get to doing your particular piece of infrastructure in that location, we're requiring the applicant to go and do further studies to confirm whether or not things have changed. Because we know, as I've said, it could take 2 years, 2.5 years before they get to a particular point in the infrastructure build. So by that particular point, things will have changed, and we accept that. So at that point, they have to do further studies, and they have to either confirm or change the application strategy accordingly to what they find at the time.
A couple of questions, lovely.
Probably Roger.
Sorry, back on. The bridge, I know it's going to be subject to a design consultation or from what I've heard so far in previous meetings, I'm a little bit concerned with regard to the shared surfaces and what provisions will be in place for wheelchair users or electric mobility scooters. Will they have a separate, or are they going to have to use the cycle path? And that's it.
So the bridge competition specifically, there's the bridge that basically crosses over Eastwick Road, and that is primarily for active and sustainable travel. So that is to serve a purpose for walking and cycling over the road. So you have the opportunity to not have to engage with live traffic, fully segregated. It's intended to be a route that you would be comfortable with your 12-year-old child using. So it's completely separate from vehicle traffic. But what we also secured is there's at-grade crossing. So at-grade means with the traffic, conventional push-button signals, you could cross at-grade. So what we have is we have a variety of opportunities to offer to people so that they can choose what they feel most comfortable using. They can either choose to use the bridge, they can use cross at grade. But what this means is because there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of choice. In all instances, there's one area where there's a pinch point. There's one area where we've got a separate 5-metre walking cycling bridge that you can use, which 5 metres is quite substantial. There's also this small area where there's a shared facility where we physically can't get the width to 5 metres. So Jenny referred to it's a short section, 2.5 metres, which is over the existing river Stort navigation, where there's just the width of the bridge, there's a very short section that's shared for 2.5 metres. But there's already a fully segregated route on the existing bridge as well that you can use. So you're given an option, but because there's a balance to be struck, we can't widen that bridge structure any further. There's no ability to do it, and if we were to do it, potentially we'd have to rebuild the whole bridge, and that wouldn't be reasonable to ask just to remove one short section of shared facility. But the impact of that shared facility is lessened further because that shared facility is next to a bus lane, it's not next to a live carriageway. So in effect you have a further 3 metres of separation from live traffic. So it's our view that on balance, that's a small impact that's balanced out by the fact that there are other alternative options for you to choose. So in terms of wheelchair users, the facilities are designed in a way to accommodate cycling, and it's got all the appropriate standards in terms of gradients. So they're perfectly usable for wheelchair users.
Just one more point, really, coming back to cyclists. I'm a cyclist, I'm not a cyclist, I'm not sure we're doing it with a wonky knee now, but we can try. Some of them like to speed, don't they? And I'm thinking you're coming down a gradient from the Eastwick roundabout down into Burnt Mill. What provision will be in the design to slow them down, I suppose, is the answer, so that the pedestrians, you might have shared services, but pedestrians will wander into the cycle lane and cyclists will wander into the pedestrian lane. So will there be anything there that we'll try and separate?
The process now, in terms, you might have reference to the current guidance called LTM 120, that sets the standard in terms of cycle infrastructure, and it talks about segregation of facilities, so segregating cyclists from pedestrians with a physical margin. So when we go through the real detailed design phase, we will be looking at those sorts of things. Through the whole detailed design process, you will have safety audits as well. But I take the point, especially in terms of bridges, because obviously on the flat, speeds are not necessarily quite as big a problem, but when you're coming down the bridge down the slope, it could be. So there are 2 levels in terms of the design competition, where you can have the ability to influence the design and take those sorts of things into consideration, and the safety audit process, and making sure that things are built and designed to the appropriate standards.
Continue in the same vein, if that's okay. Electric scooters, will they be banned from up there?
I'm assuming you're referring to the scooters, yeah.
They're not banned, I know. But
they're not legal, so we can't condone their use at the moment, but the whole point of the infrastructure that we're planning is it's future-proof to a certain extent, so we can flex if legislation changes in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Well, today, so we'd like to come back on a couple of points.
you, Chair. I think it's just important to acknowledge some of the questions that the speakers have made, just so members have full information before they enter their discussion. So, a few points, and I'll make it as quick as possible. One of the points of clarity was the net zero carbon aim, and it was stated that it was 2030. That's incorrect. It's 2040 is the target.
It's 2030 for East Harts, 2040 for Harlow.
And we are on Harlow, so it's 2040.
That's right.
So the other aspect that was spoken about was HIG. And HIG is not a material planning consideration. It's made very clear in the papers, and I'm not suggesting it is. But for completion, the crossings are not publicly funded. The money is paid and then it goes back into a rolling infrastructure fund, and that's just for your information. There was talk about the development compromising Section 106 offerings. This development, this application does not have a Section 106 offering. All contributions, all mitigations are secured by conditions, all of which have been used extensively, all of which comply with the test of conditions which are enforceable and implementable. And I'll refer here specifically to the landscaping strategy, which Councillor Pearce made reference to. So that's condition 33 in both applications, and the 5-year, if trees die within 5 years, need to be removed and replaced, is a standard condition that we have lots of experience with as a developer who are established people in this field. There shouldn't be a problem in us maintaining that and bringing it into practicality. The point that the entrance of the town plan will be harmed is factually incorrect. And there was a point about master planning and that an alternative master plan was set forward. Now again, this is for members' information because an alternative master plan in East Harts not for members, but there was a response. What came forward was a response to the consultation on these applications in the form of a master plan. Officers viewed that, including our county colleagues, and found no merit in the application. And just to put your mind at ease, there were no community facilities provided. The scheme spoke about a high-density development that used half the land that was proposed in the site allocation in East Harts, which, draw your conclusions from that, but there are a number of flaws in that discussion. East Harts officers offered a pre-application discussion, so that discussion could move forward. That offer was declined. So I'd like to put your minds at rest. There isn't a valid master plan that's in circulation. That's simply not true. And I think I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky. Debate, members. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. That was a very useful summary from Head of Planning there. I just want to highlight that in relation to the master plan, clearly not relevant as a consideration here, whatever its merits in any event. It appears to be connected with the broader housing proposals, and I thought that was worth saying before you enter into the debate. Thank you.
I think members understand that. It's not correct. Articulate, but not part of this application. Debate. Members, sorry. Jean?
Have you started
Started what?
the next section?
We're on to debate. We've been asking questions. Have you got questions for the officers?
Well, I just have one.
Can you use your microphone, please?
Yes, sorry. I've actually prepared two lots of 6 minutes on each of the applications, Chair. I think I'm under a misapprehension here, am I? Are we just going to consider them all in?
Well, we'd go for debate, but I'm not sure you can have 6 minutes. No. I mean, maximum 5 minutes during this period now. We're debating.
And are we debating? Yes, but are we debating each application? I assumed that we were going to go through them with one application.
Both separately, Jean.
Pardon?
They're both separate applications.
We are doing it separately.
Yeah, this is the central
That's all I know.
crossing.
Sorry.
Once this is finished and voted on, we'll then go to the eastern crossing. Is that all right? We might have a short break between. So we're going to discussion now. Do you want to have a speech on the discussion?
Well,
You said you prepared something, so,
I'll start off if you want me to, Chair.
well, it's entirely up to you.
This is on the central
This is
crossing.
the central crossing, yeah, which we've been talking about.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say on the local plan that when we first considered it, we weren't aware of all the details, and the details turn out to be all important. They have actually changed significantly, and we have got 867 pages, and they weren't all in the local plan, I assure you. But the details turn out to be all important, both for large sections of the community and indeed me. I am in favour of, agree very much with the idea of sustainable transport and encouraging walking, cycling, priority to bus lanes and so on. But I am concerned about the scale and particularly the impact of the environment, and it's that I would like to concentrate on, Chair, and that I think is going to there's going to be the greatest damage there. And just briefly now, so I'll elaborate next time I speak on the other crossing. There's the flooding, the loss of the floodplain, noise and air pollution, loss of habitat and the effect on species, and the loss of the trees and woodland. And is biodiversity a net gain? I think it's questionable. There is a predictable pattern here. There's an evaluation of an issue, and it's usually concluding that there are adverse impacts, effects, harm. And the solution is covered by a condition of mitigation and compensation. And the report is absolutely weighed down with doubled impact by conditions. And yes, it's a planning mechanism, but at what point should we consider that the cumulative effects of all these conditions of mitigation and compensation become acceptable or unacceptable? And also, does the condition contain enough information and detail concerning the actual mitigation? And I have concerns here. I was particularly struck by the green belt argument. Now that is very important, as both crossings actually are in the green belt partly. We all agree, both in the report and critics, that this is inappropriate development for the green belt, and we should not approve it unless there are very special circumstances. And in the substance of the report, the villages 1 to 6 and also 7 are the ones that are used to justify the development of the green belt, and outweighs the harm. The benefit of the housing outweighs the harm. And I do agree with the earlier legal criticism that you cannot justify it when we haven't actually, or it hasn't been approved. But tucked away is a get out of jail condition, condition number 4, on which practically the entire edifice rests, and it's enormous importance that we should not begin the development until the planning permission to the 1 to 6 villages is agreed. Now, you can't rest everything on a single condition, and I'm very concerned about the impact on the green belt. So, on cumulative grounds of damage to the environment, I do think we should reject this modest improvements in conjunction with local people, Chair.
Well, I just found the previous speaker astounding, given that it was her party and administration that drew up this plan and has everything shown there, the green belt, everything. And I will remind you, in clause 5.38 it says, and this is your plan, highway and transport improvements will be required, reflecting the outcome of the Sustainable Transport Corridor Study, including a widened central Stort Crossing between Eastwick Roundabout and Burke Mill Roundabout, which is exactly where this is proposed, and a new second Stort Crossing between Eastwick Road in East Hertfordshire and River Way, a north-south sustainable transport corridor from Gilston area to the north of the Garden Town to Latin Priory to the south, and improved access to Harlow Mill train station. So I think you've been aware of this since 2017, so I think to come up with this now is somewhat hypocritical. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Derby?
Thank you, Chair. If Councillor Lepard is going to use that kind of terminology, all be it. But when we took the decision over a year ago, we didn't have the information that we have before us now. The environmental impact statement that's quite available now has only been available since November. And it's ridiculous to actually say if circumstances change, you should never change your mind. There's devastation. The local community have actually made a very clear case. I know we're East Hart centric tonight, with East Hart centric officers here making the presentations. And I really, as things have gone on, it's gone from bad to worse. Very few of my questions were properly answered. We continually hear this buzzword about sustainability. Well, at the moment, the area is very sustainable as it is left alone with the wildlife. What was particularly appalling was for one of the East Herts officers to talk about the worst case scenario of actually having wildlife in the River Stort. The worst case scenario when we actually would encourage and want wildlife to be there. In regards to the answers to the questions, they would be very good panellists on BBC. Sorry, I haven't a clue. So at the end of the day, causing the chaos at the moment for 2.5 years, what is this in for the people of Harlow? Very much perhaps for some benefit for some developers, including apparently Wimpy. Is it they're making millions and not putting money back into the public purse properly? But at the end of the day, what's in it for Harlow people? Misery on Fifth Avenue. It's already very badly congested during the rush hour. And excuse my scepticism, but we actually put Essex County Council, with Harlow Council's encouragement years ago, tried the system. We have the bus route from Church Langley all the way through to the town centre. And what do we see? We see empty buses travelling up and down 2nd Avenue, to the extent that one of the bus companies has even put on a different bus route from Church Langley via Newhall now and First Avenue. In fact, it was so bad at one stage, Councillor Eddie Johnson, in my opinion, one of the few things that he's ever done that's been very commendable, is that he took out the lights at 2nd Avenue because it was causing traffic chaos in terms of being held up just for one bus to cross over. And now we gather in Fifth Avenue, there will be further lights for buses to actually cross across the traffic. The traffic at the moment queues continually from Edinburgh Way round to Fifth Avenue, and it's just going to make matters 10 times worse. Whatever East Herts wants to do, that's fine, but the dreadful impact on Harlow, now we actually have this detail, is awful. And it goes from bad to worse, Chair. Now we're being told that the pictures that we've got up here are imaginary pictures. They are pictures in somebody's imagination. This is going out to private competition. Now we all know what private competition means, the lowest possible bid. And okay, there's going to be a pinch point, apparently, just one. Well, wait for the new competition winner to get his hands on this scheme, because I can imagine the chaos that will actually be created. We've already seen Gilden Way, and we were opposed to that as a community, and the chaos that's been caused there. Edinburgh Way overran for 5 years and caused misery in Harlow. And now we're going to actually have this misery reinvigorated in Fifth Avenue for the people, a large number of people in Harlow. What's in it for the people of Harlow? I think this should all be deferred, Chairperson.
James, come back.
Well, it's clear what Councillor Downs has just played to the audience tonight. To expect us to... Don't interrupt me, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you. He's got no manners.
Well, you're the one who said you said I'm playing to the audience.
Stop arguing.
To say you only became aware of this in November is arrant nonsense. You've been involved in this and your administration since 2017 through HGGT. You had representatives there. Lots of this information was available. To say it's just come up now is absolutely untrue. And if you expect any serious people to believe that, you must be crazy. Thank you.
I'll only say a couple of words. We've gone around those a lot. Is that I've been on this planning committee for many years now, and it's nice to have an application that is putting infrastructure before development. So often we get development and then we talk about infrastructure, it doesn't appear. We don't know whether there is outline planning permission for the 8,300 houses in Gilston. But I think this is something we should be grasping with both hands to get this development, because it will improve the situation down Fifth Avenue, without doubt. And we want sustainable transport corridors, which is, I'm not taking personalities, Michael, but this is part of your brief. Your group wanted was sustainable transport corridors, and this is the first part of it, from Eastwick to Brant Mill, and then we've already had briefings on the next part. So that's all I'll say from now. So we will go to the vote. Just want to get my facts straight. So the recommendation, which is for planning permission to be granted, which is on page 139, and that includes the conditions, amended conditions, the two amended conditions, which is condition 11 and condition 14, take into consideration from last night's discussion. And then we, on the first, following the granting of planning permission, but 1B, it says the delegated authority be given to the Director of Strategic Growth and Regeneration at Harlow District Council in consultation with Head of Planning and Building Control, East Harts Council, and with the chairs of their respective development management committees to finalise the detail of the conditions attached to the respective planning permissions. If any substantive additions or changes to conditions post-development management committees are necessary, the matter will be referred back to them. So that's the conditions in pages 139 to 168, plus the informative clauses, which is informative clauses. I'm sorry, there's a lot here. So informative clauses, which I've lost now. What have we done with them? I wrote them down. It's informative clauses A to E. And can I take all those in favour of the recommendation? All those against? Abstentions? One abstention. Okay. So that application has been carried. It's recommended. Thank everybody. Before I go to the second one, I'm wondering whether we're probably running to our 2-hour time slot. So can we take a vote now that we will continue beyond the 2-hour slot when we restart? As a proposer, James, seconded. All those in favour? Okay, good. And would you like a 10-minute break? 10-minute comfort break? Right, just a slight delay, just want to try and clarify something. Right. Right, we go to agenda item 8, which is the Eastern Stort River Crossing, land to the south and east of Gilston Village, and north River Stort Gilston. Sorry, I do apologise. I'll start again. Agenda item 8, Eastern River Crossing, Stort River Crossing, land to the south and east of Gilston Village and north of River Stort Gilston, Hertfordshire. And the proposal is the erection of a new road. Harlow Council reference number is HW CRB 1900221. East Herts Council reference number is 3/19/1051/4. The erection of a new road, pedestrian and cycle bridge, replacement of all existing rail bridge at Riverway, alterations to the existing local highway network, lighting and landscaping works, listed building works to Fittersbrook Bridge and other associated works. And Mrs. Walters is doing follow you. Okay. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So a lot of the beginning of this presentation is as we've already heard this evening. So it will be hopefully briefer in terms of the first part. So as reported earlier, the application is considered in the context of Harlow and Gilston Garden Farm. The crossing proposal is the essential items of infrastructure necessary to deliver the planned growth of the Garden Town. The documents produced by the Garden Town Partnership have been endorsed by both our councils as being material consideration in the determination of applications by Harlow Council. The transport strategy and vision both set ambitious targets, about 60% of trips originating in new communities and 50% within existing communities being undertaken by active or sustaining modes of transport. And again, we have the National Planning Policy Framework as the overarching guiding principles. As previously mentioned, this application is one of 4 applications by solicitor order consent. The central store cost is determined. This Eastern Stort Crossing proposal with the listed building. Outline application for village is 1 to 6 and village 7. The main issues are the same for this application as they are for the central Stort Crossing. But again, this presentation does not seek to cover each of these as the information is comprehensively prepared in your reports. As mentioned earlier this evening, the application is to transport infrastructure that crosses the boundary between East Herts and Harlow districts, and it is therefore material to each authority what happens across the border, and as such, it's necessary to know the key relevant policies in each of the development plan documents. And again, while the officer report refers to both authorities' policies, members are reminded that they are being asked to determine the part of the application that is within its own administrative boundaries only, whilst of course being cognizant of the scheme as a whole. So the policy context for the Eastern Stort Crossing is the same as for the central Stort Crossing. The East Herts District Plan allocates the Gilston area for development of 10,000 homes and supporting community infrastructure and sets the requirements addition to the central Stort Crossing just considered, Policy GA2 requires a new vehicle crossing to the Stort Valley. The policy supporting text specifically notes the need for the improvement of connectivity over the River Stort to provide capacity to meet the needs of existing residents and businesses and future growth. And a preference by Essex County Highway Authority towards an eastern Stort Crossing option to provide relief to junctions to the western end of the A414 Edinburgh Way in Harlow, enhancement of access to the enterprise zone, and links through to the new M11 motorway junction 7A. Policy DPS4 identifies the widening of the existing River Stort Crossing and provision of this second crossing and measures to facilitate sustainable transport as strategic infrastructure required to support the development identified in the East Arts District Plan and the Harlow District Plan and the wider housing market area. The need for the second Stort Crossing was identified through the transport modelling undertaken to support the respective local planning of East Arts and Harlow. This work included a strategic highway model produced through a collaborative approach to technical evidence within the strategic housing market area and was agreed between Essex and Hertfordshire Highway Authorities, National Highways, or Highways England as they were then, East Arts, Epping Forest, Harlow and Uttlesford districts. The model identified part of the Harlow local road network, including the A414 Fifth Avenue Eastwick Road junction, which without intervention were likely to be adversely affected by the various development scenarios being tested. The modelling identified that in order to reduce the strain on the network from existing development, as well as from committed and forecast new development, the delivery of sustainable transport measures across the network would be needed. In addition to interventions on the A414 Fifth Avenue junction and the secondary access. Evidence presented to the East Arts examination in public, which included heritage and environmental impact assessments, established a clear preference for the eastern crossing option, and an indicative route for this option was included in the infrastructure delivery plan. The IDP states that the second crossing would not be required until after the existing crossing has been widened. However, it is an aspiration of the councils to deliver the two schemes at the same time in order that provision for sustainable transport can be made from the earliest stages of development. So from the initial planning of this infrastructure, it has always been intended that the two crossings operate as part of a comprehensive package of interventions, both providing particular functions in order to unlock the full delivery of development within the Gilston area and the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. As mentioned earlier, we have a neighbourhood plan in East Arts, and this slide shows you the relevant policies that are most relevant to the crossing applications. And the Harlow Local Development Plan sets the framework to guide and shape development to 2033 and beyond in Harlow. This plan was examined and adopted after the East Arts District Plan and was able to consider the emerging modelling evidence further and identified the eastern crossing option in policies HDT1, SAR1 and SAR2. And as before, the plan requires that the spatial development strategy be underpinned by the timely provision of infrastructure necessary to support development in the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. With that development phased over the local plan period to ensure that the correct levels of infrastructure are provided. In order to deliver long-term sustainable growth in the district, further enhancements to the transport network will be required, and policy SIR1 and the infrastructure delivery plan identifies those infrastructure items which require safeguarding or have land use implications, and these include the eastern Stort Crossing. Furthermore, policy SIR2 identifies the eastern Stort Crossing which enters Temple Fields employment area at River Way as a gateway location. The Harlow Local Development Plan identifies on its policies map the locations of these strategic infrastructure items, showing an indicative line, which is in red, marking the potential route to the second Stort Crossing option within the district boundary, as indicated on the plan. The policies and policies map all indicating that the route of this eastern Stort Crossing will connect the A414 Fifth Avenue Eastwick Road junction in the west with the River Way in the east. The eastern Stort Crossing infrastructure option was subjected to two independent examinations in public and supported in principle by policies within both development plans. So this slide shows the geography of the eastern Stort Crossing proposal. To the west of Terminus Park in the middle, the natural river Stort denotes the district boundary. Where the river Stort meets the Stort navigation south of Terminus Park, then the navigation becomes the district boundary. The route crosses an area of land in the east of Terminus Park to the east of Terminus Park, which is designated as Fiddlersborough, Collins and Mead Local Wildlife Site, and also designated as local green space in the neighbourhood plan. In the centre of the image you can see the labelled former landfill. This land was once a sand and gravel quarry that was subsequently used as a landfill site. of the industrial area, over the right-hand side of the image, the site boundary runs between two areas of standing water.
Sorry, members, just bear with us.
The site lies between areas of standing water created following the aforementioned sand and gravel extraction, and this land is functional floodplain. Land to the north of Terminus Park and west of Pike Corner is no longer within the green belt by virtue of the Gilson area allocation, but land to the east of Terminus Park and Pike Corner is within the green belt until the site meets the urban area of Harlow to the east. It is considered that the proposal will cause some harm to the openness of the green belt in this location, and also conflicts with the purposes of green belt in terms of safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. And therefore, in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework, the application has to demonstrate that very special circumstances exist that outweighs this harm. The application is to provide new essential transport infrastructure for the purpose of enabling and encouraging the provision of active and sustainable movement between the new and existing Gilson area communities to key destinations within Harlow as part of a wider sustainable transport network, and to facilitate the delivery of sustainable transport corridors within Harlow that will serve existing communities as well as the strategic allocations around Harlow. Furthermore, the application will enable the delivery of homes in the Gilson area totaling 10,000. These factors are combined to consider to provide for very special circumstances that outweigh the harm to the green belt. So, in terms of the detail, Road 1 is entirely in East Harts, and there is an overlap here between the eastern Stort Crossing application area and that of the central Stort Crossing, between the A414 Fifth Avenue Eastwood Road Junction and the Village 1 Almost Junction. Village 1 Almost Junction provides access into Terminus Park by the existing Eastwood Road, which will be retained but will become a lane that just serves the Terminus Park homes and the northern part of Burtnell Lane. The number of vehicles using this access will therefore significantly decrease. The new Road 1 is located away from Terminus Park, is separated by a landscape buffer, providing visual screening and a significant improvement to the properties in terms of noise and disturbance of vehicle movements. This arrangement means that the access to Terminus Park will be narrowed, and a new segregated pedestrian and cycle lane installed along its length, providing links to Burtnell Lane or towards the A414 Fifth Avenue Eastwood Road Junction, along a new route running along the southern side of the realigned Eastwood Road. Road 1 then runs between Terminus Park and Pike Corner part of Gilston, and here there is a new junction providing access to Pike Corner from the south. The Powerway section is a proposed new road bridge over Vickers Brook and two public rights-of-way, number 29 and 30. The proposal realigns the footpath between Terminus Park and Pike Corner that currently runs parallel to Eastwood Road, which will now run beneath the bridge. And the proposal also contains a new footpath link from Terminus Park to join with routes within the valley. And there are crossing points over the road for those that do not want to use the route beneath the bridge. The top image shows the landscape proposal around the proposed new junction and the location of the noise barrier along the southern edge of the carriageway. You may well just be able to see it in a dashed green line. The road bridge is designed to achieve good head height and ease of structure, and the use of only one central pier to support the bridge above. This creates a more open environment beneath it. There will also be lighting under the bridge and landscaping around the bridge abutments to provide visual screening and softening of the structure. Visually, however, there is a balance to be struck between providing appropriate noise attenuation for homes and footpath users and the overall height of the structure, particularly when viewed from the south. This is a visualisation of the alley towards Terminus Park with this junction. As you can see, there's additional planting on all sides of the proposed junction. This will provide visual screening and noise attenuation for homes on either side of the new bridge. An additional noise attenuation is provided for a noise barrier across the bridge deck and on the roadside, comprising solid wooden fencing, woven below and living below screens that will go into hedgerows. You can see the pedestrian and cycle connectors across the new junctions, and the arrow on the screen denotes the approximate location of Grade 2 listed Vickers Brook footbridge. The eastern Stort Crossing will impact on the setting of the Grade 2 listed footbridge, which is located to the north of the proposed Road 1 road bridge as shown on the left. And Fiddler's Cottage is another Grade 2 listed building which is located just to the north of the footbridge, as shown on the right hand image in pink. The Eastern Stort Crossing will cause less than substantial harm to the setting and significance of the two listed buildings. The setting of these listed buildings has changed multiple times over the history and is now considered to be diminished by the vegetation and physical road infrastructure and land use immediately to the rear of the cottage. The officer report describes how there's been extensive assessments undertaken of the impacts and alternative options, and it is acknowledged that the Eastern Stort Crossing will introduce a new structure that will impact on the setting of the footbridge to the south. The proposed road bridge will be a permanent change, and it is an important policy requirement that the significance of the listed footbridge and Fiddler's Cottage are respected, and that as part of the planning balance, any harm, including less than substantial harm, must be given great weight and importance and must be weighed against other public benefits. In the context of this application, for the purpose of the planning balance, it is considered that the less than substantial harm to the significance of these listed buildings is clearly outweighed by the substantial public benefits of the Eastern Stort Crossing, as described fully in the report. The Eastern Stort Crossing route affects a small area of land designated as a public open space within the Terminus Park estate, and this is shown in the top image in dark green. And it also affects part of the Fiddler's Brook Collinson May local wildlife site, which is also defined as a local green space in the neighbourhood plan policies. East Harlem policy requires that the loss or reduction of open spaces must be replaced, and this is achieved with the provision of a new landscaped area just north of Terminus Park. In short, 1,300 square metres is lost, and 10,800 square metres is provided. It is acknowledged that this is not quite the same as a grass landscape lawn, but in policy terms it is a suitable alternative accessible green space for the purpose of general recreation. Development in local green spaces is tightly constrained, but policy 85 of the neighbourhood plan permits in exceptional circumstances development needed for strategic infrastructure associated with policy GA2 of the East Dulles District Plan. And the neighbourhood plan policy designation overlaps with local wildlife site designation in the district plan, in which other policy requirements likewise restricts development except where there are material considerations that outweigh that harm. Because the new carriageway affects a local wildlife site in a way that cannot be avoided, the proposal must mitigate that impact. The application proposes to compensate for the loss of this particular habitat through new planting and landscaping along the northern side of Road 1, shown in the red hatching on the left-hand image. In terms of biodiversity net gain, the applicant has applied the new Natural England Biodiversity Impact Calculator, DEFRA-free, to assess the benefits of the proposed ecological mitigation associated with each crossing. As described earlier, enhancements are proposed within the applicant's land ownership to the west of the Fifth Avenue crossing, where the applicant has riparian ownership at sections of the River Stort, as shown in purple. There are a number of locations within the valley that could be improved in terms of the habitat. However, it is more effective in ecological terms to have one larger area of contiguous habitat mosaic than pockets of improvement. The added advantage of the purple area in particular is that it will run alongside an area of land already designated as a local wildlife site, meaning that there is already complementary habitat to tie into and also to obtain local seed stock from, which will speed up the naturalisation process. With the two areas shown on the plans, the Eastern Stort Crossing application will deliver a biodiversity net gain of 11.82% for habitat units, 788.2% for hedgerows, and 5.58% for river units. The ecological compensation area is beyond the red line of the Eastern Stort Crossing application boundary, but the land is within the ownership of the applicant and can be secured and is enforceable for Condition 35. Whilst more than 10% net gain cannot be achieved for the river unit elements, as explained previously, a net gain is still achieved in line with current policy. And because the main impact of the Eastern Stort Crossing is actually on the loss of habitats for ground nesting birds.
13.7.19 states to advise you that despite the new flyover being planned practically overhead, and I quote, the setting of the listed Fiddler's Bridge and Fiddler's Cottages, quote, is preserved through the retention of the viable use of the footbridge in situ and improvements to the public realm. It also says that this new crossing proposes to, I quote, directly deliver enhancements to the setting of the listed buildings. This is plainly incorrect advice. Indeed, the settings are substantially eroded and harmed. For these heritage reasons, taken together with the ecological and landscape failings and the transport gaps and inconsistencies, we ask ask that you request that you have the full information on the likely level of harm to the heritage assets, the full and correct information of the wider harm to the setting of the assets, and you have been told that there are benefits from the wider housing development. Please ask for information also on the likely harm and not just the potential benefits that may arise from the wider development, so you can fully take account in your balanced judgment of harm and benefits. At the moment, you only have one side of the argument. So we ask that you please defer this application until you have information on the wider housing development, which may well lead you to question how many crossings might be required, what the nature of they should be, and how large they should be, and how to minimise the harm to landscape and ecology and to heritage assets caused by the scale of these highway works. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Then we've got Neil Warner-Baker.
Okay, for clarification, I feel that Jenny Pearce has been less than transparent. You've missed some slides. There's a slide on the culverts, and I'd really like it one of you councillors ask her to show that, so we can discuss that. And also as clarification, thank you. Can I do my time from now? Thank you. It is folly to build this highway on piping. It is so close to urban areas that it will become social housing for the homeless and a playground for our kids. Come a flash flood, there will be death. And why? Why build this? Because it's 30% cheaper than building by other methods. Now, the roundabout bridge structure, by reason of its size, its scale and its prominent position in that location, would form an intrusive and visually dominant addition that will be harmful to the area and character of this area. I understand the concept of a sustainable transport corridor has been incorporated into Harlow's local plan, but with the intention that it should reduce car usage by 50%. However, what's been put forward can't fulfil this goal. In essence, it's a dirty big flyover, and it can't hope to reduce car usage. Harlow's local plan lacks detail. It could equally be a twee bridge onto a cycle track leading to those villages beyond. But those bridges, the paths and the tracks, they're already in existence. They fit the character of the area. Allow modification for disabled access, a pedestrian route to the rear of the train station, and a truly pleasant, sustainable alternative to car usage can be created without any of the environmental risks. Reintroduce the bus stop in Temple Fields, and all the parameters of the local plan have been fulfilled. The local plan does not endorse that it should reduce biodiversity, destroy valuable wildlife habitat, add to the flooding risk. It goes against the commitment that the council has given to the climate emergency by releasing millions of tonnes of sequestered carbon into the environment. It's ironic that during the construction of Harlow Newtown, the otter and the water vole were driven to extinction in this area. It was only thanks to the dedicated work of conservationists that they returned. Now we're going to break that link. Those otters that are in Bishopbury Park, those otters that are in Roydon, they can no longer join up. We're going to make them extinct again. Bisecting the wildlife corridor will cause unprecedented damage to our ecosystem. The logic and the delivery of this application is seriously flawed. Within Harlow, it will necessitate the destruction of sacred greenbelt land. It will destroy elements of our award-winning town park. And it does not respect the historic and the environmental importance of this area. Harlow's greenbelt land can only legally be sacrificed if it's shown there is an overwhelming need for construction. Well, at this moment, there is no overwhelming need. It's a road to nowhere. It's a big white elephant, and it's going to be an embarrassment to our town. The logic of this scheme is fundamentally flawed. How is anyone in their right mind to believe that the construction of this highway will lead to the reduction of car usage by 50%? You're having a laugh. But that's what we're expected to believe by calling this a sustainable transport corridor and then slapping a footbridge and a cycle track alongside. It's not only stupid, it's downright dangerous to expect pedestrians to walk day and night near on 2 miles along a bleak, concrete, elevated highway with no means of escape should danger prevail. It's bloody stupid. But why the rush to put the cart before the horse? Why approve this scheme before a single house has been built? Before there is any demonstrated need? The Housing Infrastructure Grant. £182 million of taxpayers' money, 36 million for the Central Crossing, and a staggering £130 million for the Eastern Crossing. But will it be enough? The estimates for this crossing were drawn up well before Brexit. The cost of raw materials, they've skyrocketed. 50, 100% and rising. What about inflation? There's a wide shortage of materials. What is the true cost going to be? And how much is it going to cost the taxpayer? Because, and this is the crunch, this grant is actually a loan to the developers, forward funded, but only paid back should they, the developers, places for people, turn a profit. And to make matters worse, this application has been almost entirely led by East Harlow Council. Little regard has been given to the consequences for Harlow people. The hundreds of business along River Way, the civic community, HCS, all will be severely affected when this railway bridge is knocked down and rebuilt, and then you build this stupid roundabout 7 metres in height. It's raised 12 feet as it enters into Mead Park Industrial Estate. How are the dump trucks going to get out of Mead Park Industrial Estate? What happens when it starts snowing? It's a nightmare. How the incline will impede lorries and juggernauts, especially during winter.
You've had 6 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Well, for these reasons, I implore you, if you haven't got the conviction to reject this application, then you must, for the good of this town, suspend your judgment until you're absolutely sure it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you very much.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a planning solicitor and I represent Mr. Beaumont and Mrs. Pate. We live in Gilston and they are the main landowners affected by the Eastern Crossing. My clients, for the same reasons as Mr. Joyce and others, seek a deferral of this application until the Villages 1 to 6 application is turned. And I have 3 legal, planning and environment points to talk you through as to why that deferral is legally required. Firstly, very special circumstances. So you've heard about that tonight. To lawfully grant plan permission, you must be sure now, tonight, that there are very special circumstances. You can't just hope or expect or assume that they will exist in the future. You need to be sure now, today. Now that's because very special circumstances need to exist which clearly outweigh both the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm. And that any other harm includes the heritage harm, the ecology harm, the landscape harm, the traffic harm, the air quality harm caused by this application. So the Villages 1 to 6 application would need to outweigh all of those harms in order for you to be sure that very special circumstances exist tonight. Now this needs to be secured now, not later. Now, very special circumstances are a very high hurdle. They're more than exceptional circumstances, in fact, which justify the allocation of Villages 1 to 6 in the local plan in the first place.
it's a higher test. Now, the legal and fatal flaw in the officer's analysis in the report is that they rely on the allocation of Gilston Villages 1 to 6 and the submission only of the outline application for Villages 1 to 6 as the identified very special circumstances. And they seek to assert that that's a matter of reasoned planning judgment and therefore unimpeachable. Now, that's plainly wrong and irrational for a number of reasons. Firstly, an allocation in a local plan cannot be said of itself to deliver any benefits, as there is no certainty because it's merely a plan, and as you rightly pointed out earlier, you don't have all the details at the local plan stage, that those benefits will actually be delivered. It requires a planning application to be submitted and then approved and secured by that approval, including a Section 106 agreement, for those benefits to carry sufficient weight to equal very special circumstances, and that clearly has not happened, because you have not had, or at least Hearts have not had, the application to determine for Villages 1 to 6. Now, this is particularly so and nonsensical when one looks at the justification for an allocation, supposedly being very special circumstances in the first place, when the ministerial statement makes clear that housing need does not in itself amount to very special circumstances. Secondly, in the local plan itself, the Villages 1 to 6 were taken out of the Greenbelt, but the Eastern Stort Crossing and the Central Crossing were not. They're still in the Greenbelt, as you pointed out earlier. Now, if the allocation of Villages 1 to 6 was of such benefit demonstrably at the time of the allocation, then why were the roads not taken out of the Greenbelt at the time? So you can't now say, well, Villages 1 to 6 allocation is so amazingly beneficial already at the date of allocation that the very special circumstances should exist now for the roads to be granted planning permission, when that was not the case when the allocation was itself formulated. Thirdly, the outline application may have been lodged, but as I've said, it hasn't been determined. There is no certainty that it will be granted, because not only the benefits need to be considered, but also the harms. The particular application for places for people may not be satisfactory to East Hearts, and they may refuse that application and look for a better one to come along. Yet officers seek to assume now that there will be net benefits definitely guaranteed, such that very special circumstances can be demonstrated now. Those benefits have to be so significant that you can be sure now that they clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm. With respect, you can't be sure about that, as the report hasn't been written and hasn't been determined by members. Officers cannot be sure either. So the question you need to ask yourselves is, how can you be sure that Villages 1 to 6 will deliver such a high degree of very special benefits when there's no report to consider? Well, it's pretty obvious. You can't do that. That would be legally flawed. The affordable housing might not be enough or satisfactory. The car parking in Villages 1 to 6 might be too much. The schools may not go in early enough. The viability of the scheme may not make it suitable to proceed. Other garden villages in North Essex, for example, were found to be undeliverable and then dropped. You simply can't know at this time. You need to wait for that application to be determined to be sure that very special circumstances exist for these applications tonight. It's clearly not rational and therefore not a matter of planning judgment to find that very special circumstances at this time exist. Lastly, officers try and place weight on condition 4, as you pointed out, is the absolute pillar of this, for the recommended planning conditions, which say no development shall occur apart from enabling works until planning permission has been granted.
Mr. Ford, your 6 minutes is gone.
May I just finish my sentence?
Finish the sentence.
Thank you.
Short sentence.
Absolutely. Now that may be so, but that doesn't help you at this point in time, because you don't know what the extent of the benefits are, you don't know whether permission will be granted, and that condition doesn't ensure that any of the development of what Villages 1 to 6 actually proceed. So to conclude, you cannot establish very special circumstances at this time, and you cannot therefore lawfully grant planning permission tonight. I'm now finished. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I know it's difficult. I've got Councillor Tony Edwards. Got 6 minutes.
Right, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to say that I have consistently asked questions about the capacity of schemes, whether or not this scheme will be fit for purpose. I've asked questions about the impact of the scheme and what the impact will be. I've asked questions about sustainability, and I've also asked questions about what alternatives have been considered and if they've been discounted, why they've been discounted. Now, I sat through all of yesterday's presentation, with 7 hours of it, and watched it from the, and I've sat through and listened to the discussion today. And listening to yesterday's discussion, and also listening to today's discussion, I'm become more convinced that we're doing this the wrong way round. Firstly, at the moment, in terms of the capacity, I have a question for the officers. What is the capacity of the existing road structures that we've got now? What will be the capacity of the new road structures that plan to be put in place? What is the anticipated breakdown?
Tony, don't push it up. One question.
Sorry, I'm making comments.
You're asking questions to the officers, and it's not in your.
I'm asking rhetorical questions to the officer, and I trust this isn't eating into my 6 minutes.
But they don't have to answer your questions, otherwise everybody else has to ask them.
Right.
So the answer is no. I was going to let you have one, but I'm not going to let you have half a dozen.
I will rephrase that then. Members of the committee might wish to ask questions of the officers along the lines of what is the capacity of the existing road structure and what will the new road structure's capacity be. They may also might like to ask what are questions like what is the breakdown that's anticipated? What is the anticipated bus usage that they're anticipating? Because they've made a number of assumptions, it seems to me here. And they've obviously made assumptions when they plan these particular roads, but they've not been explicit in any of the reports that I can see about what those assumptions are and how they will be. So, for example, you talk about increasing bus sustainability, but there doesn't appear to be, as far as I can see, at the moment, anything other than an emerging economic strategy and an emerging transport strategy. It doesn't appear to be, as far as I can see, any consistent information about how that bus service will be funded, how that will be put together. And that would have, and if that bus service isn't available, that could have significant impact on road usage. And if it is going to be made available, what will be the anticipated usage? Secondly, in terms of the alternatives, in last night's discussion, there were a whole lot of points made about the links, alternative links through to the A1184, and concerns about links through to 1184. This scheme is envisaging that it's all going to come through Harlem, basically. I mean, is that I would ask members to consider, is that the appropriate? Certainly there were concerns being expressed by Hertfordshire residents last night about that. And then, and also one of the other points that was made last night and has been raised is alternatives like ensuring that there's an adequate park and ride system. Has that been considered in any way? It's certainly not within here. It doesn't appear to be in any of the reports that I've seen. So if not, why not? So what I would say is, I mean, I think you need to go back to the drawing board in terms of saying, We need to be looking at the detail around the transport and economic strategy. We need to be firming that transport and economic strategy up first. We need to be looking at, once that's firmed up, what is the actual need at that particular time? Or what need does it throw up? And we also need to be raising at this point, do we actually need to be building that bridge now? Would it be possible to, or that structure now? Is it, as has been suggested, would be more reasonable to once we're much clearer about what the requirements are, to build it at those particular times? So I would ask, on that, I would ask the members of the planning committee to consider all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Needham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again, and to Jenny for another thorough report. I've already spoken about the Harlow Council Garden Town ambitions to accommodate substantial growth over the coming years, so I'm not trying to repeat myself too much, you will no doubt be glad to hear. As we've already recognised, in order to provide transport capacity to meet the needs of the existing and future residents and businesses, connectivity over the route of Stort needs to be improved. In line with HGT's ambitions to increase the take-up of sustainable travel modes, the nature of the links also needs to be changed to allow for more direct, safer and quicker options for those walking, cycling or using public transport. These ambitions and requirements are recognised in policy and are met by the crossing applications before you tonight. Turning to the eastern Stort Crossing, we should start by looking at the routes. Places for people is engaged closely with your officers, as well as highways authority officers from Hertfordshire County Council and Essex County Council over a considerable period of time. During this time, multiple different route upgrade options for the crossing have been reviewed and analysed, including a western crossing rather than one to the east. The eastern route was considered the most appropriate option as it offers the following. A more direct route to and from the soon to be completed M11 junction 7A, thus removing traffic from more urban areas of Harlow, including sustainable transport corridors. This facilitates greater priority being given to sustainable modes along those corridors to the benefit of the whole garden town. A direct link to employment areas, including Temple Fields and the Enterprise Zone, and to the planned new hospital for those travelling from the Gilson area and from the west of Harlem. Again, removing traffic from our otherwise used routes within Harlem. Sustainable transport link between the Gilson area and employment areas and the planned new hospital by means of segregated walking and cycling routes and bus routes. As I mentioned earlier, improved air quality in Harlem. As an added benefit of proposals, through traffic will be removed from Pie Corner, which is currently subject to significant traffic flow. This will considerably improve the environment in this community, which will be further enhanced by planned public realm improvements undertaken by places for people. Extensive engagements undertaken with the local community and wider public in statutory consultations between 2017 and 2019 prior to the submission of the applications, which also included the HGGT quality review. Post-submission, and following additional engagement, further alterations were made to the application proposals in November 2020 in response to the feedback received and included the following. Improvements to active and sustainable transport provision, landscaping and sustainable drainage. The width of the road between Pie Corner and Terminus Park was reduced to 1 lane in each direction rather than 2, and the width of the new road bridge over Fiddler's Brook was reduced. The associated junction was also simplified and reduced in size. Further details of the woven and living willow noise attenuation screen were also provided, and full replacement of the existing Riverway road bridge over the railway line, which includes provision for a 5-metre segregated cycle and footway. The final application proposal in front of you this evening has therefore been the subject of very thorough public and key stakeholder engagement. As for our application for the central Stort Crossing, detailed environmental surveys have informed every stage of the design process, with further surveys proposed following the decision on the application. While any construction will have an impact on habitats, we have put together a comprehensive mitigation scheme which will ensure that the impacts on the environment are avoided or reduced delivering overall biodiversity net gain. Where habitats are lost, they are replaced by new species-rich habitat areas. Where the capacity of the floodplain is reduced, and new flood compensation areas will be provided on a like-for-like basis. In addition, we are aware, and has been mentioned, that there is a local concern about the impact on otters. While our studies have not shown any sign of otters, we are working on the basis that they are living within the Stort Valley corridor, and we will be taking appropriate mitigating measures. We will also be planting around 1,800 trees and 3,500 metres of hedgerow. I can also confirm that the eastern Stort Crossing breeder will not cross Latin Island at any point. Overall, the environmental impacts have been thoroughly tested and reviewed by the officers and other experts who have recommended in their favour. The mitigation measures identified are committed and secured by a number of planning commissions. Therefore, in summary, the proposed crossing is critical to delivering HDC's transport mission, comprising a network of sustainable transport corridors across and around Harlow, which will change the way that we all travel. The proposals have been subject to extensive testing and community engagement, and planning commissions proposed to ensure appropriate mitigation measures are secured. The proposal will provide more direct routes to important locations in Harlow and beyond by the new Emblem Junction 7A and offer opportunities to improve air quality in the town centre by reducing traffic. They are in line with policy and have been recommended for approval following careful scrutiny by your officers. We are therefore pleased to be able to present the application to members as the first step towards exciting realisation of growth across the Garden Town, and hope they will also approve them tonight and I pay support to bring this exciting vision to reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I just say something before we go into questions and clarifications? It's suggested by a previous speaker that we should be looking at alternatives. We're not here to look at alternatives, we're here to deal with the applications before us. Okay? So, questions and clarifications to the officers. James.
Thank you, Chair. In point 4 of the Stort Crossing papers, related to consultations, I've heard it said recently that this project wasn't sufficiently consulted upon. Yet, in point 4.1, it says that consultations took place on the 14th of June to the 9th of August 2019, and on the 20th of November 2020 to 24th of January 2021. Can we know what who undertook these consultations? What were the outcomes and how were they conducted?
Thank you, Joe. So, in terms of the consultation, there has been a long-standing arrangement between East and on this application because, as I said at the very beginning, they are joint applications which cross the boundary. So there has to be one legal authority, there has to be one authority that takes the mantle and does the legwork in terms of the consultation to make sure that it's one approach, one comprehensive and consistent approach to the consultation. So what we did was we got the database from Harlow to get the address points, took several days to do so, and that was all put into our database information system, and then we consult, so East Herts did the consultation leading on behalf of both authorities. So the letters were jointly written, jointly agreed with officers and with senior officers, and there was a single approach to the consultation.
So what sort of response did you get? I mean, how many actually received this or consulted, and what sort of responses did you get?
I think the numbers are in the reports. I think it's something like 1,700 initially were consulted directly. In addition, we do press releases, Twitter feeds, Facebook, newspaper articles, and there's a Garden Town press engagement, I think, strategy, communication strategy. So it's communication strategy that's agreed between both authorities as well, and the Garden Town partnership lead on the press releases on those. We received, let me just find the figures.
Sorry. I was looking to see if anything else wants to ask.
Over 5,000 petitions.
Oh, sorry.
So 1,753 neighbouring properties were originally consulted. On this particular application, we had a total of 380 responses. Of these, 13 were neutral representations, 3 supported the proposal, 364 objected to the proposal. This was the number recorded on the 9th of February. Then we had a separate petition which was submitted to the authorities, and that contained 5,360 signatures when it was submitted.
Thank you.
Okay. Jean.
Could I ask a question?
Can you answer the microphone, Jim?
Use
the microphone.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Could I ask a question asked by Councillor Tony Edwards?
You can ask it yourself.
What is the capacity of the existing road and what is the capacity of the new road? Or words to that effect?
I think that it's a slightly more complicated answer than just answering what the road is. We need to recognise the fact that we've already talked about today about the priority is to enable and facilitate active and sustainable journeys. So the way that we've approached this is not in terms of a predict and provide, so predict the amount of people who want to drive and then provide the capacity to enable them to do that. What we've done is we've created infrastructure to facilitate the vision that everybody's collectively agreed for, that is one to enable active and sustainable travel, which I think the majority of people have supported the principle to. So it's about providing the infrastructure that it ensures that you enable people to travel actively and sustainably. We've heard today that there is no additional capacity being provided on the central Stort Crossing. The infrastructure there was predominantly to provide for active and sustainable travel options. So in effect, no additional capacity provided there. The balance is to provide the additional capacity on the eastern Stort Crossing. So we have a blended package of measures that accommodates the overall demand increase on the network. And it's also important that we reflect on the fact that this capacity improvement, this scheme that's being provided, these schemes that are being provided, do not just account for the growth at Gilston. They also account for the growth across Harlow and Gilston Belt. I think it's an important point to make because the assertion was made earlier that you shouldn't determine this application because you're not hearing all of the applications in front of you now, the outline of Gilston. But this infrastructure is to facilitate the whole garden town, so if you accepted that point, you wouldn't determine these crossings until you had every single planning application in the wider Harlow Gilston garden town area in front of you, which plainly wouldn't be sensible, nor would it deliver the infrastructure at the point when it's required.
Could I ask 3 detailed questions and just one general question? The point about this new road, when the industrial estate vehicles join it on both sides, from the HTS depot on that side and the large numbers of people also use the so-called amenity point as well. Are they being properly accommodated in regards to joining the new road? Do they get priority, or are they just left to join this new road? The second one is there's a footpath by it's not United Glass anymore, it's IO, isn't it? IO Glass down that joins the River Stort. The plan that was shown on the screen was very indecisive whether in fact that footpath would be respected. And then I'd like to also ask, is this new proposal awaiting competition?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Moving to the Essex County Council Growth and Development Team. I'll pick up the points that Councillor makes about the access into the Rivermead Industrial Estate and the Temple Fields Industrial Estate. The junction will be provided as a roundabout, which will be a give way to the right. So it will be standard time of go. So, and that's what we've worked with the developers and the applicants to arrive at a safe junction which allows for the traffic flows and also gives safe access to the industrial estate at east and west of the new road. I'm not quite sure what specific footpath, but I am aware that the footpaths in the east and Stort Crossing area, there's no changes there. The footpath will still be provided in that area where that roundabout sits as well. And sorry, your final question was, is this the? There is no competition on this scheme.
I think the footpath Councillor Davies was talking is outside the development area.
There's already a railway bridge down.
Is that all right?
And joins the river Stort.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually.
So is that going to be protected? I think that comes under the
Applications coming before Harlow for the work from the roundabout into the Barrowway, is that right?
Can I just only in the scheme where we replaced the bridge over the railway line, River Way, that scheme includes a footpath, cycle path in that facility, and that's why it's a widening bridge as well. Maybe are you suggesting, Councillor, the footpath that goes over the zigzag bridge between? That's outside the development area. There is that footpath I know that crosses the railway on that high bridge, but that is outside the development in this application. So we're not touching that at all.
Please, come on, sit down, please. Neil.
The reference point.
Yeah, you can't have everybody wandering across the
Chair,
street.
I've just, having been past the matter,
All right.
the scheme does not divert the footpath that goes down to what is called footpath 4, down from the existing riverway across the Mead Park entrance and down to those two bridges that cross the canal.
Thank you.
And the scheme includes improvements to those two bridges.
Thank you. Thank you for your assistance. I'm sorry about that. Right, anybody else? James?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions regarding some of the speakers. I think the first speaker made some quite serious criticisms or claiming there were shortfalls in the assessments regarding heritage assets. And I would like to hear what the officers have to say regarding the assessments they made. Whether there's substance in those criticisms. Second question was to another speaker who mentioned about the design of the road going into East Hearts with culverts. My question is that really for this committee to review, because it's actually in East Hearts, it's not in the Harlow part of the plan, so I'd like to hear officer guidance on that point. And it was also mentioned that the East Crossing will affect Greenbelt in Harlow and the town park. I've not seen the town park mentioned in this at all, so could you also clarify on those points for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the short the section 13.7 to the report, I think if you compare the November edition to the published at the beginning of February, there's considerably more content in that report, in that section, to make sure that the messages are very clear in there, that there has been a comprehensive assessment undertaken, not only in the environmental statement submitted by the applicants, but also by officers in their own assessments, because we also have a duty to go out to sites and undertake our own reasoned judgments about the impacts. We don't just take verbatim what's in an environmental statement, we have to go do due diligence and do our own assessments. So in terms of that, there has been a considerable assessment undertaken of the heritage and also the ecological impact of the scheme. In terms of the culverts, yes, that was the reason why that image on the example, for example, was removed from the slide pack for this committee, because, as I say, it is not in Harlow's area, and it isn't the scheme, it's as an example that obviously we're using to demonstrate to the staff members of what's equivalent. In terms of the town park, there is considerable distance between this particular application and the town park entrance. There's no physical connection or visible connection, and there is no impact on that entrance.
Or Greenbelt in Harlow. The other part, the final part of the Greenbelt in Harlow. Greenbelt, it's
report, given the representations that have been made in respect of heritage assets and the questions that we get, and in particular it was alleged that there was non-compliance with the relevant statutory tests, so I thought I could clarify that. And the section that deals with this in the report is 13.7, and it is very thorough actually. It correctly identifies and applies the relevant statutory test, which says, as the speaker, I think Mr. Joyce, pointed out, that special regard must be had to the desirability of preserving a listed building or its setting. So the test is clearly being recognised and applied, and that necessitates, along with policy, including the National Planning Policy Framework, that there is a requirement to assess what's called the significance of any listed buildings affected. That includes their setting, what's around them, is their negative, positive impact upon that. Currently, it requires that the level of harm be ascertained, and there are levels of harm, substantial harm, less than substantial harm, or total destruction of an asset, essentially. So this report has correctly identified that the harm is less than substantial. And the other thing I would point out about that is Mr. Joyce suggested that advisors, heritage consultants on behalf of his clients had done a proper assessment, much more thorough assessment, etc., as to the harm, and that somehow we were deficient in analysing that. However, Donald Insold, the heritage consultants who carried out that study, they do not differ from the planning officer as to whether, as policy requires in NPPF, the harm is less than substantial or substantial. So both those officers assessing that for this report and the study contended for reached the same conclusion. The harm is less than substantial. I think that warrants drawing attention to. The policies also say great weight must be given to the need to preserve an asset, and again, and its setting. And again, the officer has done that. They've highlighted what repair and restoration will happen. Mr. Joyce dismisses it. However, there is, planning judgment to be exercised there. Finally, the policies say where you've got less than substantial harm, which their consultants agree about, there must be public benefits that are weighed up against this harm. So weighed up. It doesn't even say for less than substantial harm that the public benefits must outweigh it. However, the officers reached the conclusion that indeed they do outweigh it. And I think that's about what I felt was warranted to clarify for you in this context. The report does also consider, for heritage reasons, could we have looked at other alternatives which would achieve the same policy objectives of bringing about sustainable transport and the level of planned growth. And it concludes that other alternatives would not, and indeed they were considered as part of the plan-making process, which is really very recent, in 2020. So I hope that aids members in weighing up the heritage issue.
Thank you, Susan. Turn the mic off, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, to sort of give weight to comments made in the speakers' representations, I thought it was good that we considered them all and just clarified their points, so members have all of the information before them. The first point, which is repeated, was premature assessment. Just to confirm with members, you will not be determining villages 1 to 6 and 7. That is within the gift of East Herts. There isn't a case that we need to determine that application before these applications. It's not relevant to us. The matter of good planning and bringing forward housing before infrastructure is reversed. as Councillor Garnett said earlier, it is actually good planning to bring forward the infrastructure before housing. There was quite an important point about transparency being made. It's important to note that the presentation is a presentation for members' benefit. There is a list of approved plans, should members vote that way, listed on page 625, that makes it very clear what we're actually approving and what is within Harlow district for members to actually determine today. And that all of the issues on heritage are not necessarily a matter for this committee because they fall out of our geography. You need to be aware of it, but you can't determine those items. And again, full completion, because it is a matter that is listed in the intent for judicial review. HIG is not a material planning consideration, so those points about the rolling infrastructure, how we're funding it, is not a matter for this committee. Thank you, that's it.
So, debate then? I'm sorry, Susan, what's more?
Chair, I'm so sorry. It's occurred to me that I've got one point of clarification, an important one on the heritage point, although our head of planning has just pointed out that the listed building impact, I think the position was it being in East Hertfordshire. Is that correct, Tanisha? It's more of an issue for those, and in any case they've had the right guidance. So in that respect, the only other thing I will say is, for context, the Donald Insall report that was relied on, they have written in to clarify they have only assessed heritage. They haven't done the balancing exercise, and I think that's important because the officers here have done the balancing exercise. What I wish to speak to very briefly is to the Greenbelt and very special circumstances implications that Mr. Ford spoke about at greater length at this committee, because that's what's permitted possibly begin to answer every single legal point he makes, but where there is a need for clarification, I will do so. So similarly to heritage, the paragraph 13.8 deals with Greenbelt. It correctly sets out the policies. I have been through it line by line, and I can confidently assure you of that the development is inappropriate, is acknowledged, that there is harm to openness and to the need not to encroach into Greenbelt is acknowledged. It's also acknowledged that these harms, together with other harms, heritage harms, landscape views, and adverse construction effects, others are detailed. Those other harms are acknowledged, and you are told that all of these harms, inappropriate development is assumed to be harmful, plus other harms must be outweighed by these benefits. Where the most heated contention comes from Mr. Ford is that you shouldn't rely on these benefits at all because you have no certainty that they'll be delivered. And of course, as some of the councillors here have rightly pointed out, there is condition 4 and there is a good deal of reliance on it. I believe that the benefits articulated, the provision of homes, the particular reliance on villages 1 to 8 and various other benefits are correctly identified. And whilst it is a single condition, it's a very important one. It says, apart from very minimal investigative or clearance or demolition works, these schemes, unless the outline is granted permission, simply won't happen. And the outline will be granted permission when a Section 106 package is secured, with all these benefits. So essentially, unless the benefits are secured, these schemes just won't go very far. And I think it's appropriate to say that that is relevant and to give it a great deal of weight. But I felt also Mr. Ford confused some tests, I'm afraid. So he purported that the committee should consider that there are very exceptional circumstances. These benefits are somehow
very exceptional. To my best understanding, when we're dealing with Greenbelt, exceptional circumstances matter when Greenbelt is being removed during the plan-making process. For very special circumstances, the case law I know of says they don't need to necessarily be rare or in themselves, and a single reason could justify it. But what's important is that there are benefits, there is confidence that they will come forward, and actually it is a matter of planning judgment, so the officers can advise you about it, and the weight is for members to give, as always. I'm confident the right things are being considered and not inappropriate things.
Thank you, Susan. Right, debate. No debate? Councillor Adams.
Well, Chair, it goes from bad to worse, doesn't it? I don't know. I'm sure there's benefits. We've heard lots of benefits. I'm sure there's lots of benefits for East Herts. It's certainly been very East Herts centric tonight. There's a 35-minute presentation. 25 minutes was taken up by Pye Corner. With respect to Pye Corner, we're being told quite rightly we can't consider that particular area because it's in East Herts. So, forgive me, but I didn't understand why 25 minutes of our time was taken up by that. And it goes from bad to worse from the officers. It's almost Orwellian, Chair. We've heard tonight new roads will reduce traffic. We've heard pollution will be less. We've heard, incredibly, loss of species will be replaced by new species. It's just absolutely incredible and not very convincing about where the benefit is for the people of Harlow. There should be relief from the roads. There's no question of that, and to a certain extent that's why it's in the local plan. There should be relief on Fifth Avenue, and this will give relief to a certain extent. What Harlow needs, and what Essex County Council and Hertford County Council refuse to do, is give Harlow a bypass, but I know that's not part of the debate tonight. But that would actually solve the problem. The amount of environmental impact on this, Chair, I don't think is satisfactory at all. I thought there would just be a flyover over the Stort and perhaps some alleviation of traffic. In fact, it's only to be a single carriageway anyway, so yeah, perhaps there won't be. Perhaps there will be less traffic. I don't know. People won't use it because of the hold-ups. It's going to have an impact on the industrial area in Temple Fields. There's no doubt of that. Yes, people do know how to give right on a roundabout. I'm sure they do give way to people coming from the right on the roundabout. I think that's ingrained in our driving habits. But at the end of the day, to actually make congestion down there worse, when you have a great long queue for the amenity centre, Chair, and I just do not see how Harlow will benefit from. East Herts will, but how Harlow will benefit from this, I just don't see it.
Thank you, Councillor Terminus. Councillor Shaw.
Well, yes, I agree, as you probably realise. Looking at this, the impact of the road and the bridge, well, it's not actually a bridge, it's an elevated road on the culvert, and it's been regarded as aggressive engineering, and it's the size of 4 football pitches, I've read somewhere, with the drop level. That is going to have enormous consequences and quite a devastating effect on the local environment. Visually, the open spaces are going to, the Stort Valley and the cherished views are going to be attacked in a sense. We walk around, a number of us walk around the area, and I agree it's an area of outstanding beauty, and it would be tragic to affect it in really the way that's being affected. It's going to be a loss of trees again, woodlands, habitat, an impact on wildlife, and the survey that the Friends of Latin Island produced introduced highlights the fact of the interdependence of species that Councillor Dumfries mentioned. And the loss of one plant is going to affect another one species, which is going to have a knock-on effect and so on, and a variety of species could be lost altogether and a whole ecosystem destroyed. And there's noise pollution both during the construction period and also in the long term. And the recordings again of Staten Island in comparison with the Central Crossing show a very, very significant difference. And it's just examples, but these are things that people feel strongly about. The flooding impact, I don't think people think that the highways actually in itself causes the flooding, but there's the question of the floodplains and also the housing, which I know we can't think consider, although we should be able to consider in conjunction with this, as has been argued. We've already got flooding in Harlem. We've got an inadequate system. We've got sewage coming through manholes and so on. And this can only make things worse. If we look at the mitigation measures or compensation, how can you compare the compensation of a wetland that has taken maybe 400 years to develop? Or how can you mitigate the loss of a 100-year oak? You can't do that. I know you can do your best, and I agree that the best has been attempted. But nevertheless, when we consider benefits and harm, it's a very difficult thing, and I think we're going to lose out on that. And the measures often raise more questions than answers. The consideration of the climate emergency action has been raised in criticism. We actually did pass the climate emergency resolution some time ago, but the difficulty has been in incorporating it in all our policies. That will take a long time, and obviously has, and we haven't, there doesn't seem to be a lot of incorporation in these particular proposals. I suspect that the carbon footprint will increase, and there will be cumulative effects of the harm, and also it will be sadly car dominated and traffic dominated in spite of the good intentions. We've got the Greenbelt arguments, which I won't go into, and I would ask again that we defer this, we look for alternatives, because we do need a new look for an environmentally friendly route, a more modest route, aiming to reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the whole scale of improvements, and avoid the environmental damage that this has wrought.
Jean, you've had your 5 minutes.
Right, so could I just ask final sentence, Chair, that we should work
One sentence.
Yes, thank you. Work with local groups so that the plans can effectively be agreed before they arrive at this committee stage, so that the discussion has taken place, the consultation has fully taken place with local groups who are going to be affected.
Okay, thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Davis.
Some years ago, I spoke alongside Councillor Charles, council meeting, about the route from Junction 7A. We both objected to it. I assume that he was concerned about the amount of traffic going past the housing estate in Gilman Way, area that he represents. I was worried about the amount of traffic going through the Mark Hall. Unfortunately, that argument was lost, but it hadn't sitting here tonight. It's true that the Labour administration passed the local plan. Under threat from the central government, we had to work with neighbouring authorities to agree housing targets, otherwise the matter would be taken out of our hands. I was never involved in the cabinet meetings where the decision was made, but my understanding was that the crossings were agreed in principle. Imagine my horror when Councillor Hardware provided me with drawings of the bridges, and I thank him for that because he set me off on a trek and I walked miles looking at areas like that. So I went immediately to explore. I'm 71 years of age and have been enjoying the River Stort since I was about 10 years of age. I fished in the river, camped close by, walked and cycled along the towpath and walked through the wooded areas and along with my boating. Over the years I've taken my children to visit the river, taking their lives in their hands crossing the zigzag bridge. Our local MP has stated that the developers should rethink the crossing, and it has been mentioned in Parliament. So what are the residents of Harlow getting out of this? Destruction of wooded areas, no allocation of social housing or indeed affordable housing, an increase in traffic, 2 years of chaos that we had in the roads between Gates Roundabout and the roundabout where you're going to go on a new crossing. I think just to lay cables for Gilston, nothing for Harlow again. I'm concerned about the road going over the old dump, because no one really knows what's buried there, although there's rumours that Lord Luking will be there. It could be harmful to the environment or people. I'm disappointed that the residents of Terminus Park have invested in the village way of life and they're going to be disrupted. The River Stort is an outstanding area of beauty with many wild animals. Despite reports, I think the biodiversity is being badly affected. A number of people have contacted me by email, by phone, to vote against this proposal. Thames Water haven't really maintained the area either. Unfortunately, I'm now in between a rock and a hard place. Part of the administration that approved the local plan, and so I can't vote for this and I can't vote against it. I'm just really concerned that this area of beauty is going to be destroyed. Thank you, Chair.
Everyone will go to the vote.
The allegation that the presentation was heavily weighted towards these parts. Just want to remind members again that the presentation is there for visually and is not the documents that will be approved. These again are reflected on page 625. The other aspect is a matter of consultation raised by Councillor Clark, that the applications have not been collectively consulted on. This is a statutory requirement and has been confirmed, we have confirmed. It has been correctly consulted on, so there aren't any errors in this application. Thank you. Sorry. One other point, sorry. Councillor Davies, on the matter of contamination, there are 3 conditions that deal with land contamination.
Thank you. All right, with that then, time being what it is, we'll go to a vote. The recommendation, which is on page 591, is to grant planning permission, along with the amended conditions 40 and, sorry, number 11 and number 40 conditions. And the conditions are, sorry, I got it wrong. Just condition 40 covers this one, sorry. And the conditions, so it's conditions 1 to 44, and the plan, subject to condition, the reasons set out in the end of this report, and B, the delegated authority be given to the Director of Strategic Housing and Regeneration Harlow District Council in consultation with Head of Planning and Building Control at East Harts Council and with the chairs of their respective development management committees to finalise the detail of the conditions attached to their respective planning permissions. Breath. If any substantive additions or changes to conditions post-development management committee are necessary, the matter will be referred back to them. So with that, the recommendation is to grant it. All those in favour? Okay. All those against? Abstentions? One abstention. Okay, so that's been granted. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll just go back to the agenda. Are there any references from other committees? No references from other matters of urgent business? They've been done. So with the time now, 11:55. It's late. 10:55. Oh, thanks for that. Thank you all for coming.